Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident A Crisp April. Morning had settled over the little town of Eastgate as the Bluebell flower shop's front windows caught the pale glow of dawn. Inside, pots of hyacinth and primula clustered around the counter, their delicate blooms offering silent promises of renewal. Yet, this peaceful tableau was about to shatter at precisely 8:15. A figure slipped through the door, a woman dressed in morning black, her glove-covered hand clutching the battered handle of a small leather satchel. The bell tinkled. The shop's sole clerk, Miss Clara Everton, looked up from arranging a bouquet of ivory lilies. "Good morning," Clara said, her voice gentle. "How may I help you?" The woman's face was pale beneath a veil of ebony lace. She raised a trembling hand to lift it, revealing eyes so wide with desperation they seemed to drink in every detail of the shop. I need flowers," she whispered. "Something blue, bluebells, if you have them." Clara paused, hesitating over her tools. "I'm afraid our last shipment of bluebells arrived only yesterday and hasn't yet opened. But I can prepare. Hyacinth, forget-me-nots, and perhaps a few irises in the same shade." "No," the woman snapped, her voice sharper than expected. She laid the satchel on the counter, the corners of its leather worn smooth by travel. "You will find a single bouquet of bluebells in my satchel. I want them arranged exactly as they are, without touching the flowers." Clara's slender brow creased. "I'm sorry, madam, but handling fresh blooms, I insist," the woman interrupted. "There is a message tied to these bluebells. It must remain untouched until the arrangement is delivered." Clara exchanged a troubled glance with the shop's cat, perched on a stool behind her, its tail swishing. Reluctantly, she opened the satchel. Inside lay a delicate bundle of classical bluebells, their petals still folded tight. A small card, sealed with deep navy wax bearing an unknown crest, peeked out from beneath the stems. Clara picked the card up by its edges and broke the seal. The handwriting within was precise, almost severe. "Deliver these flowers at precisely noon to Mr. Lionel Fairclough at Fairclough Manor. Let no one else see them. Miss Bluebell's fate depends upon it." The words sent a ripple of unease through Clara's placid demeanor. "Miss Bluebell," she murmured. The woman's lips tightened. "That is between you and me, my dear." She swept her veil down. "I will return at 11. Do not be late." As Clara resealed the satchel and placed it gently on the counter, the woman slipped out into the street, her heels clicking against the cobblestones like an echo of doom. Clara stared after her, heart pounding, as the bell tinkled once more and the door swung closed. Moments later, the peaceful silence of the shop felt heavy-laden with questions. Why the secrecy? Who was Miss Bluebell? And what peril awaited her at Fairclough Manor? Clara's mind raced as she carefully laid the satchel on a side table and locked the shop's door against any curious intruders. Outside, the town of Eastgate carried on unaware. A milkman balanced his tray of bottles on a bicycle. A paperboy shouted the morning headlines. Church bells chimed. But within the walls of the Bluebell flower shop, a darker melody had begun, one that would draw Hercule Poirot into its intricate web and set in motion a mystery unlike any this quiet town had ever known. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The Morning. Shadows still clung to the narrow lane as Miss Clara Everton prepared the Bluebell flower shop for its unusual delivery. The satchel lay unopened on a side table, its leather surface cool beneath her fingertips. She had spent the hours between 8 and 11 pacing the cramped back room, wrestling with unease and uncertainty. At last, the hands of the antique war clock crept toward 11, and Clara steeled herself to see the task through. She lifted the satchel gently and carried it to the counter, where a small brass bell perched. With trembling fingers, she undid the leather straps and tilted the bag forward. The bluebells tumbled onto the counter in a perfect, unbroken bundle. Clara stood back, as if wary of disturbing a fragile spell. Underneath the blooms lay the Navy card. She broke the seal with a pinched breath and read the instruction once more. Deliver these flowers at precisely noon to Mr. Lionel Fairclough at Fairclough Manor. Let no one else see them. Miss Bluebell's fate depends upon it. Clara slid the note back inside the satchel, then arranged the bluebells into a simple paper wrap. She tied a single black ribbon around the stems and echo of the woman's mourning garb. There was no time for an elaborate arrangement. The message insisted on speed and secrecy. Just before noon, Clara stepped out into the crisp air, clutching the satchel. The route to Fairclough Manor wound past neatly trimmed hedges and gravel driveways dotted with aristocratic homes. As she walked, she could not help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see the mourning woman trailing at a distance. But the lane remained empty at the Rotillon gates of Fairclough Manor. A uniformed groundsman waited. He scrutinized Clara's approach with a faint frown. "Delivery for Mr. Fair?" he asked, voice polite but firm. Clara nodded and offered the satchel. "These flowers, sir, for Mr. Lionel Fairclough. The instructions say they must be delivered directly and no one else is to see them." The groundsman hesitated, adjusting his cap. "No one else. Very well, I'll inform Mr. Fairclough that you're here." He stepped aside with a forced smile. Clara passed through the gates and into the shadowed courtyard. The manor door opened before she could lift the bell. Inside, the foyer was grand but hushed, heavy rugs muffling footsteps, ornate portraits lining the walls like silent sentinels. A footman in livery guided her without a word, ascending a wide staircase to a pair of oak doors at the far end of the hall. Clara pushed them open, entering a panelled drawing room. Afternoon light streamed through stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on Persian carpets. At the centre stood a tall man in a grey coat, Lionel Fairclough himself. His sharp profile and piercing blue eyes gave him the air of an observant hawk. Without preamble, Clara stepped forward. "Sir, these flowers," she began, extending the satchel. "They came with instructions." Lionel held up a gloved hand. Here he unfastened the leather straps and retrieved the bluebells. He frowned, examining them as though expecting a hidden mechanism. "You handled them?" Clara shook her head. "No, sir. The instructions were specific, without touching the flowers. I merely wrapped them." He glanced at the neat paper wrap and black ribbon. "I see." He looked back at the blooms and then at Clara. "Who sent them?" "I do not know, sir. A lady in mourning, very mysterious." A hard line formed around Lionel's mouth. He placed the bluebells on a side table and produced a small silver canister. "Please stand back." He opened it, revealing a fine white powder inside. With gloved fingers, he sprinkled a few grains onto the tabletop near the flowers. Clara's heart thudded. "Sir, what are you doing?" Lionel watched as the powder fanned outward until it met the cold edge of a hidden groove in the table. Then he breathed onto it, and the coruscating line traced the outline of an impossibly thin crack in the wood, like a spider's web. "A poison-detecting agent," he said quietly. "A colleague of mine discovered it. It reveals alkaloids." He tapped the surface, and the crack widened, releasing a faint, metallic odor. It's old, but still potent. Whoever sent these wanted you to touch them. He fixed Clara with a steady gaze. Thank you for bringing them, Miss Everton. But I believe the danger lies not here, but in that shop. Clara's skin prickled. But the instructions, Miss Bluebell's fate. Lionel tapped the table again. Perhaps Miss Bluebell is a red herring, or a cry for help. I intend to see to this myself. He looked to the doors as the footman entered hastily. Has anyone else arrived? The footman shook his head. Not as yet, sir. Lionel turned back to Clara. May go, but be vigilant if anyone approaches you with further instructions. Come straight here. His voice softened. And Miss Clara, thank you. You might have saved a life today. As Clara departed, her thoughts raced. Poison in the flowers. Deliberate, targeted, meant to harm someone who delivered them. But why risk Clara's life? And who was the true recipient? She hurried back to the shop, each step echoing with dread. Back inside, she locked the door and sank into a chair. She examined the satchel, now empty except for the card, and traced the crest on the navy wax. It resembled a stylized flower, 5 petals encircling a tiny dagger. It was unfamiliar, yet carried an aristocratic elegance, a crest that would surely be recognized by an expert. Minutes later, the shop bell tinkled. Clara looked up to see a diminutive man enter, his head poised with a curved moustache and wide, inquisitive eyes. He wore a tailored suit of soft grey and carried a small black case. His gaze swept the shop before settling on Clara. Miss Everton, he asked in a lilting accent. I am Hercule Poirot. My friend, Mr. Fairclough, instructed me to look into these curious bluebells. He feared foul play. Clara rose, relief and bewilderment mingling on her face. Monsieur Poirot, yes please, you must help. Something very strange is happening. Poirot placed a gloved finger to his lip, his grey eyes alight with interest. Monsieur Fairclough mentioned the danger, very clever of him. Now, mademoiselle, tell me everything from the beginning. No detail is too small for my little grey cells. As Clara recounted the morning's events, Poirot listened with rapt attention. He examined the empty satchel, inspected the stain of powder still clinging to Clara's gloves, and studied the card's wax seal. Every wrinkle in his forehead, every tilt of his head, spoke of a mind piecing together a hidden puzzle. Outside, the late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting lengthening shadows through the windows. Within the Bluebell flower shop, however, a sharper light had entered, a detective whose reputation for unmasking villainy preceded him. The first clues had been gathered. The true inquiry was only beginning. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. By mid-morning the following day, Hercule Poirot had summoned a select group to Fairclough Manor's oak-panelled drawing-room. The velvet curtains were drawn to temper the spring sunlight, and a large mahogany table stood ready to receive confidences and confessions alike. At precisely 11 o'clock, the door opened and each guest was shown in by the footman ever, 2 at once, for Poirot believed in the power of solitary first impressions. Lady Estelle Fairclough, Lionel's elderly aunt, entered first. Her faded lavender gown and gloved hands bespoke an elegance unruffled by age, though faint lines around her eyes hinted at past anxieties. She paused at the threshold, peering around the room as if expecting spectres. Poirot noted a slight tremor in her gloved fingers as she clasped them before her, and the way her gaze flickered toward the empty chair where Clara had sat the day before. Next came Dr. Cyrus Bennet, the local physician, Tall and lean, with steel-rimmed spectacles and a crisp black suit, he carried himself with clinical precision. Poirot observed the doctor's neat morning coat even now. Bennett's pocket watch dangled from a chain above his waistcoat, and a faint scent of antiseptic clung to his cuffs. He nodded curtly to Poirot, his lips set in a thin line, before settling into a seat at the far side of the table at 11:30. Mr. Edward Moore, business partner to Lionel Fairclough in the Bluebell Estate Investments, arrived. His tailored navy suit and polished boots spoke of prosperity, yet his eyes were restless. He shook hands with Poirot, then took a glass of water with a hand that momentarily grazed the table in a way that left a tiny smearan, almost imperceptible trace of dark residue. Shortly thereafter, Mr. William Wyndham, the family solicitor, was ushered in. Middle-aged and precise, Wyndham wore a charcoal morning coat and carried a briefcase. His meticulous appearance belied an air of unease. He cleared his throat, opened his case, then closed it again without removing a single document. His eyes remained fixed on the carpet, avoiding direct contact with the other guests. Finally, Miss Clara Everton herself entered. Dressed in a simple grey frock, with her hair pinned back, she seemed the least at ease of all. Her hands, still bearing the faintest blue stain from the poisoned powder, were folded neatly in front of her. She shot a quick, grateful smile at Poirot, as though relieved not to be alone in this scrutiny. Poirot, seated at the head of the table, rose to welcome them. He adjusted his moustache, his grey eyes bright with curiosity. Mesdames et he began in his precise English, tinged with Belgian lilt. Thank you for coming. I believe the events of yesterday may be interconnected, and it is my task to unravel them. No judgment will be made until the facts are known, and I require your honesty without reservation. He gestured to the empty satchel on a side table. Miss Everton has already demonstrated considerable courage in bringing those cursed bluebells. Yet, we must ask, who among you knew of this message in wax? Has any one of you seen this crest before? He produced a reproduction of the navy seal and passed it to Lady Estelle. Lady Estelle handled it with a faint shudder. I confess, I have never seen that design. It resembles a flower, yes, but a dagger? No, it is unfamiliar to me. Dr. Bennet examined it next, holding it gingerly between thumb and forefinger, nor to me. I know the heraldic emblems of Eastgate's notable families, and this is none of them. Edward Moore took the seal, his brow furrowed. He traced the petals with his fingertip. I've never encountered this in any of our legal papers or in Lionel's estate records. It seems intentionally obscure. Wyndham nodded mutely, his voice measured. I have handled every legal document for the Fairclough estate for decades. This seal does not appear in any will, codicil, or power of attorney. It is, in my professional opinion, entirely unknown. Miss Everton leaned forward, her voice trembling slightly. Then who could have sent those flowers? And why insist on secrecy, only to nearly kill me with poison? At this, Poirot inclined his head. A key question. But first, let us consider personal motives. Each of you stands to gain or lose depending on the outcome. Lady Estelle, he turned to her gently. You are the senior member of the family. Has Lionel's inheritance or his reputation ever been a point of contention? Lady Estelle's gloved hands tightened. Lionel and I are very close. His elder brother died without issue, leaving Lionel as heir to the manor. I have no desire to see him harmed, only to see him happy and secure. Poirot nodded, but his eyes lingered on the slight crease between her brows. Of course, yet. Anxiety wears many faces. Dr. Bennet, you, as a physician, must know the potency of various toxins. You handled the reagent yesterday. Double quotes, Dr. Bennet's lips twitched. My reagent recognizes alkaloids in minute amounts. I wished only to ascertain whether the bluebells were tampered with. I have no interest in murder. My reputation and license would be destroyed. A fair point, said Poirot, moving on. Mr. Moore, your business with Lionel could, a financial disagreement, have made you desperate. Edward's restless gaze darted to the window. Our partnership has had its difficulties, but nothing that would compel me to such extremes. You know as well as I, Monsieur Poirot, that Eastgate's markets have been volatile. Yet I have every reason to maintain goodwill with the Fairclough name. Wyndham cleared his throat, leaning forward at last. I apologize for my earlier silence. As solicitor, I have advised Lionel on recent amendments to his will. There were suggestions of redistributing some assets to a charity. Some family members objected, fearing their shares would diminish. He paused. But I would never undertake murder for a minor change in provision. Poirot steepled his fingers. And Miss Everton, you, too, have a stake. Your shop's reputation could be tarnished if suspects believe you complicit. Clara's pale, cheeks flushed. I never intended harm, monsieur. The instructions were threatening, yes, but I had no idea someone would risk poison. I merely wanted to protect my livelihood. Please believe me. Silence fell as each suspect reflected on their own potential motives and actions. Poirot's gaze drifted around the room, noting the subtle tells. Lady Estelle's quick swallow, Dr. Bennet's tightening jaw, Moore's stillness, Wyndham's avoidance of direct eye contact, and Clara's burning sincerity. Finally, Poirot spoke, his voice calm but firm. We have at least established that this crest is unknown to you all, and each of you denies knowledge of the plot. Yet the poison was real, and the message, Miss Bluebell's fate, remains unexplained. I shall need to examine the satchel, the wax, and any person who might have crossed paths with Miss Everton yesterday morning. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. But for now, the circle is closed. These 6 individuals are the only ones privy to the events of yesterday. Henceforth, none may leave Fairclough Manor until I have spoken with each of you individually. Is that understood? Each guest bowed or inclined their head in assent, some more readily than others, as the footman opened the doors to usher them back to their rooms. Poirot remained seated, hands folded before him. Behind him, the late afternoon light waned, casting the room into soft gloom. Through drawn curtains, Fairclough Manor's chiming clock warned that time was running time for truth, and time for deception to crumble under the light of Poirot's unerring intellect. Chapter 4. Poirot's observations that evening. Manor's dining room was arranged for 6, a round table of polished walnut, atop which gleamed silver candlesticks and fine bone china. The servants withdrew discreetly once the suspects had been seated, leaving only Poirot at the head, his keen eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with anticipation and unspoken tensions. Poirot surveyed the assembled group before the first course was served. Lady Estelle sat to his right, her posture impeccable, though her gloved hands trembled ever so slightly as she folded her napkin. Dr. Bennet occupied the seat opposite Lady Estelle, his back rigid, spectacles catching candle beams whenever he turned his head. Edward Moore and William Wyndham flanked the other sides of the table, and Miss Everton, looking wearied yet resolute, completed the circle. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, as though savouring the moment before inquiry. Then, with graceful elegance, he placed a gloved fingertip to the rim of his water-glass. Monsieur Fairclough's absence is regrettable, Poirot began softly. Alas, he has been detained by urgent business in London. Yet he has entrusted me with this investigation, and so I trust you will bear with my presence this evening. Miss Everton offered a polite nod. Lady Estelle inclined her head, though her gaze briefly flickered toward the closed door, as if expecting Lionel to enter at any moment. Dr. Bennet remained impassive, and Moore's restless eyes roved around. The room, Wyndham's lips pressed into a thin line. The first course arrived, delicate consomme served in porcelain bowls. Poirot tasted it thoughtfully, then dabbed his lips with a napkin before speaking again. In this house, as in life, the smallest details may reveal the greatest truths. Do you find anything unusual about this meal? He inquired, looking around. Edward Moore's fork paused mid-air. Unusual, monsieur. Poirot's moustache curled in a faint smile. The consomme is exquisite, yet it contains no trace of the truffle essence typical of Fairclough Manor's kitchen. A curious omission, would you not agree, Dr. Bennet? Dr. Bennet frowned, swirling his spoon. Perhaps the cook wished to spare us richness at the end of a day. A lighter dish, yes. Ah, Poirot tapped the table lightly. But imagine we are presented with two identical crystal decanters of vintage claret. One is true, the other has been adulterated with an invisible compound. Without tasting, would you not suspect the one slightly heavier in your hand? A minute difference, oui, but a difference nonetheless. Wyndham cleared his throat. Are you implying, Poirot? Held up a finger. Merely an observation, yet it speaks to human behaviour. Those who tamper hide their work under normalcy. Hence, the slightest deviation is a signpost. Now, let us consider conversation. Tell me, Lady Estelle, how did you spend your afternoon? Before our meeting, Lady Estelle drew a breath. I strolled in the rose garden with my companion, Miss Clara. We discussed the upcoming charity ball. All seemed ordinary until the message arrived. She hesitated, eyes on her soup. Then, of course, everything changed. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, and you, Dr. Bennet. You examined the bluebell's residue immediately by mornings. Light, I gather. The doctor set down his spoon with mechanical precision. Yes, I returned to my laboratory at the house and applied my reagent. The reaction confirmed the presence of atropine, a potent toxin. The discovery worried me greatly. Monsieur, Poirot interrupted Edward Moore, if I may, why reveal medical findings at dinner? Surely such matters are best discussed privately. Poirot's grey eyes sparkled. Mon ami, perhaps. But consider this, those who know less may inadvertently reveal more. By disclosing my questions here, I observe genuine reactions. By caution that attends secrecy. He paused, turning toward Wyndham. Mr. Wyndham, you were aware that Lionel considered revising his will to benefit the Children's Guild charity. Is that correct? Wyndham stiffened. Yes, I drafted the proposal at his request. The Guild's work with disadvantaged youth is admirable. And yet, Poirot continued, it removes 10% of family funds from direct inheritance. A trifling amount for some, but significant for those accustomed to privilege. He let the silence linger. Wyndham's gaze flicked to the tablecloth, then back to Poirot. I admit, not all family members were pleased, but disagreeing with A charitable donation is not akin to murder. Poirot's lips curved knowingly. Indeed, displeasure is common, but poison is uncommon. He looked to Miss Everton. And you, mademoiselle, delivering the flowers, did you encounter anyone else on the lane to Fairclough Manor? Clara shook her head, recalling the walk. No, monsieur. I saw no one until I reached the gates. It was quiet, too quiet. Poirot steepled his fingers. Silence often conceals more than words. A witness may lurk in the hedges or behind a carriage. One never knows. He glanced at Moreau. Serge, your partnership with Lionel addresses the Bluebell Estate's expansion into neighbouring counties. Would you say tensions arose over land acquisition? Moore's jaw tightened. Expansion seldom proceeds without discord. Yet I managed negotiations personally. None of my counterparts threatened violence. He exhaled. I assure you, monsieur, my interest lies in profit, not poison. The second course arrived. A roulade of pheasant, buttered asparagus, and new potatoes. As the footman served, Poirot observed each plate's contents. He noted that Lady Estelle's vegetables were precisely arranged. Dr. Bennet's asparagus spears slightly overcooked, Moore's roulade sliced thicker than the others, potatoes untouched except for a single bite, and Clara's plate nearly clean, a sign of appetite overcoming nerves. Poirot cleared his throat. Forgive my scrutiny, but these details are instructive. Lady Estelle values order. Dr. Bennet is pragmatic. Mr. Moore is forceful in appetite. Mr. Wyndham cautious, and Miss Everton earnest. He angled his head. Each trait useful in understanding action. Now, let us speak of the crest. He produced the miniature seal once more. I have consulted my records. No noble house bears this emblem. I have also interviewed Mr. Fairclough's butler, Mrs. Carstairs, who confirms seeing a stranger deliver it yesterday. Poirot paused. Yet when questioned, she could only describe a woman in black. No name, no carriage, just footsteps echoing down the lane. Lady Estelle's voice quavered. That woman costume of mourning, but her gloves immaculate. No sign of dirt from the satchel. Clara nodded. I wiped them thoroughly, but I saw no smudge on her gloves. Poirot tapped his chin. A professional hand, perhaps. Gloves, worn specifically to avoid trace evidence. He looked up, fixing each suspect in turn. Such gloves, custom-made, are not sold at any haberdashery in Eastgate. They would need to be ordered in London. A murmur passed around the table. Dr. Bennet removed his glasses to polish them, avoiding direct eye contact. Moore's fork hovered. He set it down deliberately. Wyndham's breathing became audible in the hush. Poirot leaned forward. Thus, our unknown woman travelled with intent and preparation. She delivered a lethal bouquet, then vanished. The question now is, to what end? To silence Miss Everton, to frighten Lionel, or to manipulate the will? These questions, Mies, Amos, we shall unravel soon enough. He straightened, and a servant appeared with a final course of lemon tart. As they ate, each cast furtive glances at one another, weighed down by the detective's insights. Poirot remained impassive, though within his mind the little grey cells clicked with precision, laying the groundwork for the interviews to come. When the candles burned low and the servants cleared the table, Poirot dismissed the party with a graceful nod. We reconvene tomorrow at 10. I shall speak with each of you privately. He smiled wryly. Until then, good night. As the guests departed, the tension lingered like a perfume in the air. Poirot remained alone, gazing at the emptied table, each discarded plate and goblet a silent testament to secrets yet untold. The next day's interviews would peel back the layers, then the real game of psychological deduction would begin. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin the following morning. A soft mist clung to the hedges of Fairclough Manor as Hercule Poirot made his way to the small study adjoining the drawing-room. The door stood ajar at precisely 10 o'clock, as arranged. Inside, a neat desk, a single leather armchair, and 2 her-backed chairs awaited. A kettle steamed gently on a side table, promising tea and, with it, revelations. Poirot greeted Miss Clara Everton first. She entered with measured steps, her grey frock subdued in the soft light. She offered the detective a small curtsy before taking the chair opposite him. Mademoiselle, Poirot began, folding his hands. I wish to begin with your account of yesterday morning. Please describe, in your own words, the moment you first saw the woman in black. Clara drew a steadying breath. I arrived at the shop at precisely 8. The bell tinkled as she entered delicate footsteps, almost hesitant. Her gloves were pristine white lace, beneath which I could see nothing. She carried her satchel, as though it were both precious and terrible. Did she speak before you did? Clara nodded. She cleared her throat. Her voice was soft but firm. She asked for bluebells, though our own had not bloomed. I offered substitutions, ... and she refused. She insisted. Clara leaned forward, voice trembling. She produced the satchel and demanded I arrange the flowers exactly as they were. When I opened it, I saw the sealed card. I did not know whether to be terrified or intrigued. Then she said, Miss Bluebell's fate depends upon it. Those words, they chilled me. Poirot tapped his moustache thoughtfully. Did you perceive any hesitation in her manner, a tremor of the hand or a quaver in the voice? Clara shook her head. No, monsieur. She seemed resolute. She paused. Yet her eyes, dark beneath the veil, held something more. A plea, perhaps, or a threat, T.R.S. Bean. Poirot smiled gently. That is most helpful. Now I shall speak with Lady Estelle. He signalled to the footman, who stood in the doorway discreetly. Clara rose and departed, leaving Poirot alone with his reflections. Lady Estelle Fairclough awaited in the drawing-room, seated upon a velvet chaise longue. She rose with grace, though her palms were clasped tightly at her waist. Lady Estelle, Poirot began, thank you for seeing me so early. I understand you and Miss Everton walked in the rose garden before the delivery. Yes, Lady Estelle's voice was soft. I brought Clara to refresh her spirits, for she had been anxious about a large wedding order. We discussed the ball, the flowers for the charity event, and then I bid her farewell. Did you notice anyone else strolling the gardens? Gardener, perhaps. Lady Estelle frowned, recalling. No. The groundsman was tending hedges near the west wing, but otherwise no one. The garden was unusually still. Stillness is often the precursor to action. Poirot's tone was gentle but insistent. You mentioned the charity ball. Is there any connection between Miss Bluebell and this organization? Lady Estelle's expression stiffened. Not that I know of. The ball benefits the Guild of Artisans, not the Children's Guild. Lionel's philanthropic interests are varied, of course. Poirot inclined his head. One final question. When you saw the seal on the card, did it remind you of any family emblem or crest? Lady Estelle pursed her lips. I scanned our archives in my mind now. It bore no resemblance to ours or any allied families. It was ... unsettling. Thank you, Lady Estelle. Poirot bowed, and she glided from the room, leaving him with the faint scent of lavender next. Dr. Cyrus Bennet entered his interview with a brisk nod. Poirot poured tea into delicate porcelain cups before offering one to the physician. Dr. Bennet, Poirot said, I wish to understand your actions after discovering the poison. He sipped his tea, eyes attentive. Why did you not warn Miss Everton directly of the danger? Dr. Bennet's lips tightened. I feared alarming her unduly. The toxin atropine can be absorbed through the skin. Better to verify its presence quietly than inform the household without panic. Tapped his saucer. A prudent approach. Yet the instruction on the card was explicit. Let no one else see them. Did you consider the possibility that warning others might compromise an investigation? The doctor frowned. My priority was safety. I informed Mr. Fairclough immediately, trusting him to take decisive action. And yet Poirot's gaze was unwavering. You tested the powder at your private laboratory in the manor, rather than here in the shop. Why delay? Dr. Bennet's shoulders stiffened. My reagent is stored there also. I wished to cross-reference the result with samples of genuine bluebell pollen, which I keep TR's bean. Poirot set down his cup. One more point. In your laboratory, did you notice whether any of the bluebells had been cut clumsily or showed signs of handling inconsistent with a florist's care? The doctor hesitated, recalling. Now that you mention it, the stems were unevensome, cut at angles a florist would avoid. Yet the card specified they remain untouched. Perhaps the sender harvested them themselves, an intriguing possibility. Poirot stood, extending his hand. Thank you, Dr. Bennet. The final interviews proceeded in similar fashion. Edward Moore in the library, where Poirot noted scuff marks near the windowsill suggesting a hurried exit. William Wyndham in the billiard room, where a stray pocket-knife lay on a sideboard. And ultimately Lionel's butler, Mrs. Carstairs, who confirmed seeing the woman in black but could recall little else beyond the echo of her heels. Each suspect provided fragments impressions, hesitations, contradictions. Moore admitted that negotiating land had required him to threaten rivals. Wyndham confessed to burying personal letters in Lionel's papers to protect family reputation. Mrs. Carstairs revealed that the stranger spoke in a voice that trembled only once when mentioning Miss Bluebell. By midday, Poirot returned to his temporary quarters, a small study where he spread before him the interview's notes. The empty satchel, photographs of the wax seal, and a pressed sprig of violet from Lady Estelle's rose garden. He seated himself at the desk, closed his eyes, and allowed his little grey cells to reflect. The initial interviews were complete. Now, like a sculptor, he would chip away at each detail, discerning shape from stone. Outside, the manor chimed 12, but within those walls, time was measured by the slow, deliberate uncovering of truth. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. That afternoon, Fairclough Manor's drawing-room filled with the local constabulary, summoned at Lionel Fairclough's behest. Sergeant Higgins, a stout man with a bristling moustache, carried a leather folder containing the preliminary findings. He stood beside Hercule Poirot and cleared his throat before addressing the assembled party of suspects. Gathered at Poirot's invitation, "Ladies and gentlemen," the sergeant began, voice steady, "the evidence we have, while circumstantial, points strongly to one individual among you." He flipped open the folder and produced a bright red scrap of fabric. This was found snagged on the gates latch when Miss Everton delivered the flowers. "It matches the lining of Dr. Bennet's coat." Dr. Bennet's face drained of colour. His hand trembled as he reached for his jacket standing on an adjacent chair. "That lining, yes, it is mine," he admitted, voice trembling. "But I cannot explain how it came to be on the gate." Sergeant Higgins held up a vial containing a small sample of the white powder. "Furthermore, traces of atropine were detected on your laboratory gloves. Dr. Bennet, since you handled the reagent yesterday, it's natural you would have some residue, but combined with the fabric, it is compelling." Dr. Bennet swallowed hard. "The gloves were mine. I admit I tested the flowers in my lab, but I cleaned the gloves afterward, even laundered the lining." He reached inside his coat, withdrew a bloody handkerchief, and pressed it into his palm. "Yet I found this in my pocket just now. I do not know how it got there." His voice broke, Miss Everton gasped, and Lady Estelle clutched her hands too. Her chest. Moore exchanged a quick glance with Wyndham, while Mrs. Carstairs looked on with wide, sorrowful eyes. Sergeant Higgins nodded. "A strong motive also exists. You were concerned that Lionel's charitable changes would deplete funds intended for medical research. Witnesses report heated discussions between you and Mr. Fairclough last week. Discussions about funding priorities." Dr. Bennet interrupted urgently. "Never once did I threaten him. I only sought to secure donations for the infirmary. You must believe me." Poirot raised a gloved hand, silencing the doctor. "Sergeant, may I?" He approached the sergeant and murmured for a moment. Then he turned to the group. "I thank you, Sergeant Higgins, for your thorough work. Yet, before we render final judgment, allow me one observation." He stepped back and surveyed the suspects. "In my examination of Dr. Bennet's laboratory, the reagent indeed detects atropine. However, I noted that the concentration on Miss Everton's gloves was minimal, far less than a single dose would require to prove a point. The gloves bear traces, yes, but not enough to indicate intent to kill, rather merely to test." He held up the vial. "Moreover, the atropine on the gloves matches a sample of veratrum alkaloid, a common lab control rather than pure belladonna-derived atropine. This suggests Dr. Bennet was performing a routine calibration, not manufacturing a lethal dose." The sergeant frowned, glancing at his notes. The report did specify that it appeared identical in reaction to pure atropine. Poirot inclined his head. "A reasonable confusion. Yet the critical point is the red fabric. Its lining is indeed Dr. Bennet's, but the tear is recent, and the stitching uneven, a repair job done hastily. The lining in your everyday coat is intact, Doctor. This torn scrap matches a spare lining in a coat purchased by Mr. Edward Moore just last month." All eyes flicked to Moore, who stiffened in his seat. "Monsieur," he said, voice low but firm, "I admit I had a coat tailored in London, and the lining tore last week. I entrusted it to a local seamstress, who patched it and returned it with the hasty stitching you describe. I concealed the replacement inside my old coat to prevent damage to my reputation. I did not know it would end up on the gate, Sergeant." Higgins looked from Moore to Dr. Bennet. "So your fabric theory was misplaced suspicion," Poirot supplied gently. "The fabric points to Mr. Moore, but that does not implicate him in the poisoned flowers. The atropine evidence, when properly understood, exonerates Dr. Bennet. Instead, Mr. Moore's private lining ended up on the gate quite by accident, likely during his nocturnal stroll through the gardens." Moore nodded. "I did walk near. the gate late last night to inspect a broken lamppost. I must have brushed against it, though I had no knowledge of the bluebells or the satchel at that time. The sergeant folded his folder. In that case, we have no definitive suspect. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry to have alarmed anyone. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the group. Dr. Bennet exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Lady Estelle dabbed her eyes with a laced hanky. Clara's shoulders slumped, tension draining away. Poirot stepped forward, tapping a finger to his moustache. So, mes amis, we see how easily a clever misdirection can mislead even the diligent. The true culprit intended precisely this too. Draw suspicion toward Dr. Bennet. The torn lining, the chemical residue, they were distractions. We must not be content with the obvious. Sergeant Higgins inclined his head. I will revise my report, monsieur. He turned and exited to relay the update. As the constable's footsteps faded, Moore sank into a chair. I beg your pardon, Monsieur Poirot, he said, voice strained. But if not Dr. Bennet or myself, then who? Poirot's grey eyes gleamed. A question of great importance. But first, I must examine the seamstress's workshop, the reagent supply logs, and any carriage records for arrivals at the manor this week. The first false lead is behind us. Now, we proceed onward, deeper into the maze. He glanced at each. Suspect. Part 2 of our inquiry shall resume tomorrow. Unless, Bean, sir, further clues emerge before then. He bowed slightly, and the group dispersed, their relief mingled with renewed unease. Outside, the manor's lamps flickered in, the growing dusk casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward secrets yet untold. The stage was set once more, and Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the hidden pattern beneath layers of deception. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. Late morning, light filtered through the tall windows of Manor's library, illuminating rows of leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of aged paper. Poirot had arranged the furniture in a crescent, a small table with tea and biscuits at the centre, surrounded by 5 chairs, one for himself. The others photos he would test. Today, the game was psychological, designed to provoke the truth from hidden recesses of fear and guilt. Miss Clara Everton arrived first, her quiet determination masked by exhaustion. She sat nearest the tea, eager for a warm cup, but alert to every nuance of Poirot's expression. Lady Estelle Fairclough followed, her lavender gloves impeccably polished, eyes scanning the spines of books as if seeking refuge. Dr. Cyrus Bennet entered next, adjusting his spectacles nervously, followed by Edward Moore, whose posture was rigid, and finally William Wyndham, who paused at the threshold as though unsure he belonged. Poirot poured tea with deliberate care, setting cups before each guest. He seated himself last, smoothing his moustache before speaking in measured tones. Mes amis, today we engage in a delicate dancer psychological game. I shall pose questions, not solely to gather facts, but to observe reactions. The slightest hesitation, a shift in posture, a catch in the voice, these are the breadcrumbs that lead to the culprit. He gestured to Clara. Mademoiselle, you delivered the flowers under threat. Tell us now, when the poison was revealed, did you fear for your own safety or for the life of Miss Bluebell? Clara's fingers tightened around her teacup. Both, monsieur. The words on that card, they promised doom. I feared someone would die, perhaps, even me. Poirot nodded, his eyes kind. And yet you persevered. Why? Her gaze lifted. because I could not ignore a plea for help, even if it was veiled in menace. Compassion overrules fear, monsieur. He smiled, admirable. And yet, notice how Lady Estelle's expression changes at the mention of compassion. He turned to Lady Estelle. Lady Estelle, do you agree? Lady Estelle's lips pressed together. Compassion is a virtue, certainly. But in matters of estate and legacy, compassion can be manipulated. At that, Clara's brows knitted. Lady Estelle inclined her head, confidence flaring in her posture. Poirot made a mental note. Clara's sincerity contrasted starkly with Estelle's measured scrutiny. Next, Poirot addressed Dr. Bennet. Doctor, you calibrated your reagent and found atropine. Yet you confess to calibrating with veratrum. Alkaloid. Why not admit that immediately? Why defer until suspicion fell on you? Dr. Bennet's hand paused mid-air, biscuit crumbs clinging to his fingers. I did not wish to confuse the investigation. I feared being judged incompetent if I revealed calibration tests. Poirot's grey eyes sharpened. Ah, fear. Of professional disgrace. And yet, once suspicion arose, you confessed the truth. Observe how Mr. Moore's expression tightened when you spoke of disgrace. He turned to Moore. Sir, have you ever feared disgrace? Moore's jaw clenched. He set down his cup. Disgrace can ruin a man's reputation and livelihood. I have seen it happen to colleagues who mishandled delicate negotiations. Poirot nodded knowingly. Indeed. And yet, you also confessed to walk in the garden at night, brushing against the gate. A simpler admission than Dr. Bennet's. Notice the ease with which you speak of your own fault. Moore's shoulders relaxed only slightly. It was a minor indiscretion. Wyndham breached the silence. Monsieur Poirot, this game does it. Reveal truth or merely discomfort. Poirot turned his keen gaze upon the solicitor. True motive often lurks beneath discomfort. It is when one is off balance that the mask slips. Now, Mr. Wyndham, have you ever misplaced letters to protect someone, as you admitted yesterday? Eyes flickered, and he swallowed. I have personal letters can cause scandal. I believed I was preserving the family's dignity. And yet, said Poirot, leaning forward, preserving dignity may conflict with preserving life. The poison in the flowers can that be explained as a misguided act of protection. Wyndham's hands trembled. He looked down. No, I would never endanger a life. Poirot's moustache twitched. Let us test that conviction. He reached to his tea and sipped. All of you, imagine for a moment that the card's author is among this circle. The author planted breadcrumbs, fabric, powder, letters to mislead, to create fear. Who gains most from fear? He paused, glancing at each face. Eyes softened with empathy. Lady Estelle's narrowed with calculation. Bennet's widened with dread. Moore's gazed outward, deflecting. Wyndham's darted inward, guilt pressing at his chest. Poirot raised a finger. Fear is a powerful weapon. It forces confession, but also misdirection. Observe, Lady Estelle, how you speak calmly of manipulating compassion. You have never trembled, in fear of disgrace only, of loss of control. Lady Estelle's gloved hand quivered barely perceptibly. She set down her teacup. Monsieur, control is vital in managing any household. Yet poison, that is the work of the desperate. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely. Now, Dr. Benetwin, you realized the card spoke of Miss Bluebell. Did you consider that Miss Everton might be the intended victim, not Miss Bluebell? Bennet's brow furrowed. I presumed Miss Bluebell was a coded reference to the Flora Sclara. I did not think there was another. His voice softened. I am sorry if I caused anyone to fear. Poirot's gaze flicked to Clara, who gave a small nod. Your remorse is apparent, Doctor, yet remorse does not equate. Guilt resides where intent was laid. He stood, smoothing his coat. And now, sir, he turned to Moore, your night wanderings. You said you tended a lamp-post. Why would you not alert the staff if a lamp broke? Why act alone, in secret? Moore's face tightened. He cleared his throat. I thought to spare them inconveniences to replace a bulb. I did not wish to disturb the household. A kind act, yet one cloaked in secrecy. Poirot gestured. Secrecy breeds suspicion, but perhaps you sought solitude for reflection. Moore's gaze dropped. He nodded. Yes. Times of stress call for solitude. Finally, Poirot faced Wyndham. And you buried letters, managed reputations. If the threat was to protect, why use poison instead of persuasion? Wyndham's jaw worked. I do not know. I did not send poison. His voice cracked. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. He spun on Lady Estelle. And you, madame, with your mastery of appearances, was your stroll in the rose garden mere pretense to gauge Miss Everton's reactions? Lady Estelle stiffened. I accompanied Clara for charity's sake, nothing more. Poirot clasped his hands. Charity is noble, yet a noble heart may conceal a guilty one. We have tested devotion, fear, remorse, secrecy. The mask is slipping, but the final reveal awaits the next move. He bowed slightly. Thank you, Mies Amos. Rest well. We shall reconvene after dinner. I have observed Patensteiny, but telling. The true culprit plays with fear as an artist plays with paint, and the canvas is nearly ready. As the guests departed, their minds stirred by Poirot's probing, the library fell silent. Between the teacups and half-eaten biscuits lay invisible traces of tension, seeds of doubt sown deep. Outside, the manor stood calm, yet within its walls a psychological storm gathered momentum, ready to break with the thunder of truth. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery. That evening's dinner was all but forgotten when the household awoke to urgent whispers echoing through Fairclough Manor's corridor. Just before 8 o'clock, Mrs. Carstairs, the butler, discovered a tipped-over decanter in the study, its stopper shattered on the mahogany. Descant a wine-glass stained crimson on the Persian rug. The owner of the study, Mr. Lionel had not yet returned from London. But the threat it implied was unmistakable. Someone had attempted to poison him. Hercule Poirot stood in the doorway of the study, his expression grave beneath the warm glow of the wall sconces. A single lantern on the desk cast elongated shadows across the spilled wine and the shattered decanter neck. He knelt to examine the glass fragments, then gently tapped the rim of the remaining decanter, producing a hollow chime. Observe. Poirot said quietly to Sergeant Higgins, who hovered nearby. The stopper was removed before the wine was poured. Whoever did this was discreet. No disturbance of the cork's foil. No sign of force on the bottle. A deft hand, trained in subtlety. Apt. Sergeant nodded, rolling a leather-gloved finger through his moustache. We found traces of a fine powder in the decanter, monsieur. Initial tests suggest oconotine. Poirot's grey eyes narrowed. Oconotine highly toxic, a rapid-acting alkaloid, distinct from the atropine in the bluebells, yet similar in intent, to separate poisons, to distinct methods. The implication is clear. The murderer or murderers are bold, escalating. He stood and surveyed the study. The desk drawers were undisturbed, but the inside of one had a faint smear of powdered residue. On the desk lay an opened letter addressed to Lionel Fairclough, its contents spread across the blotter. "Meet me in the study tonight at 8. I come bearing truths that cannot wait." Poirot picked up the letter, noting the paper's quality. Laid stationery embossed with a subtle crest, a 5-petaled flower encircling, a slender dagger the same as the Bluebell card's seal. He held it aloft so the light fell upon the writing. "Same handwriting as the earlier note," he murmured. "Same seal. Yet this time the sender expected the recipient to be present and planned to silence him directly." Sergeant Higgins frowned, but Mr. Fairclough was not here. Someone else turned the meeting into a trap. Poirot replaced the letter on the blotter. Indeed. And now a secondary mystery unfolds. Who discovered the plot and tampered with the arrangement? Did the poisoner flee in panic, or were they interrupted? He walked to the window and peered out into the dark gardens. Perhaps someone saw a shadow among the hedges, or perhaps a servant returned unexpectedly. Mrs. Carstairs entered quietly, her hands clasped Monsieur Poirot. "It was I who found the study door ajar. I thought to fetch more candles, but I heard no footsteps. When I saw the decanter, I called for help." "Thank you, Mrs. Carstairs." Poirot nodded. "No one else entered this wing between 7 and 8. She shook her head. "No, monsieur. All servants were engaged in supper preparations in the kitchens." Poirot turned back to the group of suspects already gathered in the drawing-room. Lady Estelle, her lavender gloves now stained with grief. Dr. Bennet, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Edward Moore, whose jaw was clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. And William Wyndham, who paced with restless anxiety. Miss Everton, summoned after delivering news, stood apart, her eyes wide. Poirot addressed them calmly. "Mies, Amos, we have not one, but now 2 attempts on life. The bluebells intended for a florist or other, and the decanter intended for Lionel Fairclough himself. Both employed subtle poisons, one delayed, one immediate, both orchestrated with finesse, and both bearing the same seal." He held up the opened letter. "This summons was meant for the master of the house, but who took the risk of entering the study at 8. It could not have been someone fearful of detection. They would not have approached in daylight so boldly." Lady Estelle's voice was a whisper. "Monsieur Poirot, perhaps the sender believed no one would answer. They assumed Lionel would be there alone." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps, but when the sender found the room empty, they might have hesitated, then panicked. At the sound of a footstep, the broken stopper suggests haste." He surveyed each suspect in turn. "Consider motives anew. If one sought to frighten Lionel into altering his will, the bluebells served to test his defences. The decanter served to coerce him directly. Yet, if Lionel remained unaffected, a pan failed. Now someone else must clear the evidence. Who among you benefits most from Lionel's absence?" Dr. Bennet spoke first, voice low. "I visited the study yesterday afternoon to request additional funding for the infirmary. I had no knowledge of tonight's meeting." Poirot's gaze shifted to the physician's lab coat, still spotless. "And yet your hands bear no traces of aconitine, a clean mind, or a deliberate absence." Dr. Bennet swallowed. "I assure you, I did not touch the decanter." Edward Moore's eyes flickered. "I was in the greenhouse at 8 inspecting a rare orchid specimen. I have a witness, The groundsman saw me there. Poirot noted Moore's tense posture, an alibi, but imperfect. The greenhouse is a short walk from the study. In daylight, one could slip between. Moore bristled. I did not kill Lionel. His voice cracked. William Wyndham interjected, voice calm but firm. I was reviewing estate documents in my chambers. No one can vouch for me, but I had no reason to meet Lionel secretly. He swallowed hard. The meeting card, it addressed only Lionel. The Bluebell note spoke of Miss Bluebell, now. This note speaks of truths. Who knew Lionel's secrets? Who would demand an after-dark meeting? Lady Estelle, composure regained, pressed her gloves. Only those close enough to know his personal affairs, perhaps his solicitor or his business partner. She glanced at Wyndham, then Moore. We all had reason to speak with him, but not necessarily in secret. Only if one wished privacy. Poirot stepped forward, raising a finger. Our privacy. We value privacy when our actions would not withstand scrutiny. The true culprit sought not consultation, but confrontation. The letter was their plan too. Corner Lionel. Yet, finding him absent, they were forced to abandon the scheme, leaving the decanter intact. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But think, who among us discovered the plan and neutralized it? We see no attempt to destroy the decanter entirely, only to leave evidence of foul play. A message, we know your game. A hush fell. Clara's breath caught. Dr. Bennet's eyes darted. Moore clenched his fists. Wyndham's face paled. Lady Estelle's lips parted in a silent gasp. Poirot surveyed them in turn. Someone intervened. Someone loyal to Lionel. Someone who feared he might walk into a trap. Who among you cared enough to act swiftly? Who knew of Lionel's expected meeting? Miss Everton stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, I did not know of the meeting. I only arrived after Mrs. Carstairs called for me. Exactly, mademoiselle. Poirot smiled. You are innocent of this act, yet your presence here indicates your concern for Lionel's safety. But one among you knew the meeting would occur. He turned to Dr. Bennet. Doctor, did you not speak with Lionel this morning regarding his health? Did he mention a private meeting? Dr. Bennet hesitated. No, our conversation was strictly professional. Poirot's eyes moved to Moore. Edward, did Lionel mention to you arranging a private discussion this evening? Perhaps on business. Moore's brow furrowed. We spoke of estate investments this afternoon, but nothing of an after-hours meeting. William Wyndham swallowed. I spoke with him yesterday about the will. He said he would review documents with me tonight. He did not specify time. Lady Estelle's gloved hands trembled. I asked him to meet privately to discuss the charity ball's funding. He agreed and said, tonight. Moore and Wyndham both turned to her. Lady Estelle pressed her lips together. I did not mean him harm. I only wanted to persuade him on the Guild of Artisans budget. When I realized he was not here, I assumed he had forgotten. Poirot's grey eyes softened. Madame, you acted on impulse. You knew of the meeting, but you did not anticipate poison. You discovered the decanter, but chose not to pour it, vainly to warn Lionel. He looked at the others. Her actions were neither to kill nor conceal evidence, but to signal danger. Lady Estelle exhaled, relief mingling with shame. I thought to leave it as warning. I could not believe someone would truly poison him until now. Poirot inclined his head. Thus, the secondary mystery resolves. The decanter was not merely a failed attempt to kill, but a signal both of malicious intent and of loyalty. The culprit intended to strike. Our unexpected interventor thwarted the plan, leaving traces for us to find. He turned to Sergeant Higgins. Please record Lady Estelle's statement, and have the decanter sampled for poison levels, but hold no one else. Let us continue. As the constable departed to dictate the report, Poirot closed his eyes briefly. The little grey cells worry. 2 distinct crimes, 2 deadly poisons, 1 shared sealand, now a warning left in its place. The web had grown more tangled still, but the strands were slowly revealing their pattern. The next move would determine who stood to gain from fear, and who from justice. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The morning after the attempt on Lionel Fairclough's life dawned pale and misty, as though the heavens themselves hesitated to speak of the day's horrors. Inside Fairclough Manor, the drawing-room had been converted into an impromptu war room, pressed chaises rearranged to form a horseshoe around Poirot's small writing table, upon which lay transcripts of interviews, the 2 incriminating letters, and the shattered stopper from the decanter. One by one, the 5 remaining suspects took their seats under Poirot's unblinking gaze. Miss Clara Everton, Lady Estelle Fairclough, Dr. Cyrus Bennet, Mr. Edward Moore, and Mr. William Wyndham. The air was heavy with unease, yet charged with expectancy. Everyone felt the web tightening. Poirot rose, brushing imaginary specks from his suit. Mes amis, thus far our investigation has focused on individual motives and singular acts of misdirection. Today, we explore the connections among you, those hidden threads binding your interests, and perhaps revealing alliances or resentments you would prefer to conceal. He unfolded a chart annotated with lines and arrows. Observe, Miss Everton. Shop supplies flowers for the Guild of Artisans, which Lady Estelle champions. Dr. Bennet's infirmary relies on funding from Lionel's charitable foundations, as does the Children's Guild, opposed by some family members. Mr. Moore's land acquisitions conflict with the Guild of Artisans' plans for community workshops. Mr. Wyndham drafts legal instruments governing these endowments. The overlapping of philanthropy, commerce, and reputation is intricate, Nan. Miss Everton's eyes widened. She glanced at Lady Estelle, then Dr. Bennet, as though seeing them for the first time. Lady Estelle's diamond brooch caught the light. She stirred in her chair, fanning herself with a handkerchief. Dr. Bennet rubbed his temple, while Moore leaned forward, frowning. Wyndham's expression remained unreadable, but his hands gripped the arms of his chair. Poirot continued. Let us begin with the Artisans' Guild. Lady Estelle, you assured us yesterday your interest was purely benevolent. Yet I have discovered that your personal endowment to the Guild increased significantly after negotiations with Mr. Moore concerning the Bluebell estate. You hoped to secure the Guild's patronage before land prices rose. Is that correct, Lady? Estelle pursed her lips. I did increase my donation, yes, but my intentions were philanthropic, to preserve local crafts. The land deal with Mr. Moore had no bearing on my charitable giving. Mr. Moore interjected, voice measured. I recall discussing shared interests. The new workshop spaces for artisans would enhance the value of adjacent properties, including those I manage. But I never suggested Lady Estelle give more. Poirot nodded. A fair distinction, yet the timing is curious. Within days of sealing your agreement, the Bluebell note appeared, poison intended for Miss Everton, whose shop stands between the proposed workshops and Lionel's manor. A threat to her could stall the project, affecting both your interests. He let his words hang before moving on. Now, Dr. Bennetshire Infirmary, funded in part by Lionel's estate, stands to lose greatly if the charity ball is downsized. You testified you and Lady Estelle discussed the ball's budget, yet you neglected to mention your own appeals for additional funding. Why? Dr. Bennet swallowed. I sought extra funds because patient needs increased. I did not wish to conflate my request with Lady Estelle's charitable patronage. I kept them separate. Poirot's grey eyes sharpened. But in practice, your appeals and Lady Estelle's gifts intertwine for both bolster Lionel's philanthropic image. If he reduced the artisan's ball, he might reallocate funds to the infirmary or to the Children's Guild, which he favours. Such shifts could disadvantage your projects. Is that concern imaginary? Dr. Bennet's voice trembled. I admit concern, but I never threatened Lionel. I only counselled him on medical needs. Remarkable restraint, Poirot murmured. Yet counsel is powerless without pressure. He set down the chart and picked up a small stack of aged letters. Mr. Wyndham, I have here correspondence you penned to Mr. Fairclough's late brother, letters indicating you helped conceal a scandal involving Lady Estelle many years ago. In return, you were promised a share of the estate if Lionel died. Without issue, these are conditional clauses you drafted yourself. No. Wyndham's jaw clenched, and he rose abruptly. Those letters were drafted to protect a family tragedy from public disgrace. The clause regarding the estate was disposable, never enacted, merely a means to ensure my silence. It was removed upon Lionel's succession. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed, the clause is absent from the final will. Yet the knowledge of its existence gave you leverage, did it not? A potential to gain if misfortune befell Lionel. Wyndham's face went pale. He sank back into his chair. That leverage was never to be used. I remained loyal to the family. I have no desire to see him harmed. Loyalty is a fine virtue. Poirot responded softly, but fear of exposure can be a powerful motivator. Now, let us consider the Bluebell estate itself. Mr. Moore, you and Miss Everton both have roles, yours as investor, hers as florist. Yet I find invoices for rare blooms you purchased through her shop, ostensibly for botanical research. Research into what, I wonder? Moore's shoulders stiffened. I collect specimens for my personal herbarium, nothing more. Poirot raised an eyebrow. An herbarium, surely. Yet none of the local horticultural societies report your membership. Could it be that your purchases aided Dr. Bennet's toxin studies, supplied plant samples for his reagents? Dr. Bennet's spectacles fogged momentarily as he exhaled. I did request samples aconite, belladonna nightshade, but I obtained them legally through pharmacology suppliers. I did not involve Mr. Moore. Moore shook his head vehemently. I merely sold Miss Everton's surplus stock I acquired from an exotic plant dealer. No toxins were involved. Poirot's gaze swept the group. Thus we have intertwined interests, commerce, charity, reputation, science, all converging upon Lionel Fairclough's assets. Hidden connections indeed. But what of personal ties? Miss Everton, I have learned you once served as Lady Estelle's companion for several months before opening your shop. You resigned abruptly, citing ill health. Was there more to your departure? Eyes widened in alarm. She rose to her feet. Monsieur Poirot, yes, I was Lady Estelle's companion. I left because I discovered discrepancies in her accounts. Small diversions of funds meant for charity. I confronted her, and she paid me a stipend to remain silent. Then she suggested I start my own business. Lady Estelle's gloved hand flew to her mouth. "That was between us in private," she whispered, voice trembling. "I paid you to save face, to protect family honor." Miss Everton's voice was steady but firm. "I did not realize until later the money came from misappropriated funds. I thought it a generous gift for starting my life." Poirot leaned forward. "So, Miss Everton, you depart under a cloud of secrecy your shop, funded by Lady Estelle's diverted charity money. That explains your loyalty to her, and perhaps her motive to silence you once your conscience troubled you." Lady Estelle's eyes glistened with tears. "I did not mean to harm Clara. I only wished to preserve our family's reputation. Please believe me." Poirot folded his hands. "We now see how past indiscretions bind you, mutual obligations, concealed debts, fear of exposure. But binding bonds can both compel and protect. Each of you has reason to fear Lionel's decisions, his will, his gifts, his refusals. The question remains, who transformed these intertwined interests into the poison-laced bouquet and the deadly decanter?" He stood, smoothing his coat. Today's revelations cast new light upon the case. Resentments buried beneath civility. Alliances formed by necessity, secrets traded for silence. Tomorrow we delve into the final clues, though so minute they escape notice, yet hold the key to unmasking our culprit. Until then, Mies, Amos, reflect upon the tapestry we have revealed. As the suspects departed, their faces a mix of shock and apprehension. Poirot lingered by the window, watching the morning mist swirl around the manor's turrets. In that haze lay the last hidden strand, and he was determined to grasp it before the killer could strike again. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. Late that afternoon, after the controlled chaos of the morning's revelations, Poirot retreated to the quiet of his temporary study, perched above the manor's east wing. The small room felt more like a sanctum than a chamber of inquiry. A polished writing desk strewn with papers, neatly stacked interview transcripts, and the 2 sealed letters that had heralded poison. Yet it was the smallest item on the desk, a single sprig of pressed violet, its petals brittle with age, that commanded his full attention. He held the violet beneath the light of a shaded lamp, examining the delicate veins in each petal. It had come from Lady Estelle's rose garden, Mrs. Carstairs had confirmed. Tucked between the pages of a gardening journal left on the drawing-room sideboard. Why, Poirot wondered, would an unassuming flower be pressed into the plot of a murderous scheme? There was purpose in such a detail, he was certain. His grey eyes flicked to a photograph pinned on the wall beside his desk. An image of the gate where Clara Everton first delivered the bluebells. The close-up showed the tarnished latch, the flecks of powder scattered in the thin-line traces of the first poison. Below it lay a second photograph of the study's Persian rug, its crimson stain still vivid, and a magnified inset showing the narrow groove in the desk where the poison-detecting reagent had revealed the wood's hidden crack. Poirot sat and took from his coat pocket the wax seal he had removed from the evening letter. He turned it over between his fingers, noting the 5-petaled flower and slender dagger motif. Its origin remained a mystery, but he felt certain the crest pointed to someone with botanical knowledge, someone who understood not only blooms, but blades. He closed his eyes and allowed his little grey cells to work. The key clues, the bluebells bearing atropine, intended for the florist, or perhaps a metaphorical Miss Bluebell. The decanter of wine tainted with oconatine, meant for Lionel Fairclough. The secondary letter summoning Lionel to the study. Lady Estelle's intervention. The torn lining misdirection. The hidden past between Estelle and Clara. The patchwork of charities, investments, and reputations, and that solitary violet. Why press a violet? Violets symbolized modesty and faithfulness in the Victorian language of flowers. Yet this lineage of poison spoke of betrayal. The violet was not a random choice, it was a cipher. He recalled a moment from Dr. Bennett's lab. The doctor had remarked on the reagent, revealing alkaloid traces when introduced to an etched groove in wood. That groove bore the same curve as the petal's central vein motif. Poirot's eyes snapped open. He retrieved the sealed gardening journal from the desk. Carefully, he leafed through to the pressed violet and turned the page to the opposite side. There, faintly sketched in pencil, was a diagram of a bookcase in Fairclough Manor's library, drawn as though marking a secret compartment. The sketch was incomplete, the lines uneven, yet significance lay in its placement. He rose, hat in hand, and descended in silence to the library where the earlier psychological games had been staged. The manor's corridors were hushed. Servants moved as spectres through twilight. Poirot paused before the grand bookcase, its oak panels carved with floral scrolls. He ran his gloved fingertips over the spines of leather-bound volumes' histories, indents of gold stamping, subtle grooves between panels. His finger caught a slight notch above the midpoint, almost imperceptible. He pressed it with a soft click. A slim panel swung inward, revealing a narrow shelf behind the false facade. On it lay a leather-bound booklet embossed with the same 5-petaled dagger crests, and beside it, a small filet filled with violet-hued powder. Poirot retrieved both and closed the panel behind him, letting the bookcase swing shut imperceptibly. Back in his study, Poirot poured the violet powder from the phial onto a sheet of blotting paper. He then picked up the reagent from Dr. Bennett's earlier lab tests, carefully preserved in a small vial, and sprinkled a single grain onto the powder. To his satisfaction, the powder reacted with a faint luminescence, revealing the presence of Digitalis compounds, potent heart-affecting agent. A second toxin, yet different again, meant to induce sudden cardiac failure rather than paralysis or convulsions. He turned to the little booklet. It contained meticulous notes on the histories of local noble families, their botanical emblems, and hidden archives, everything from old diaries tucked in manor attics to clandestine diaries written in cipher. Leafing through, he found an entry under the crest's image. The violet crypt beneath the library's guardians. Press the hidden petal to reveal truth. He smiled, for the message was literal. The violet pressed against the plant-engraved bookcase had revealed its secret. But there was more. The author of these notes knew every corner of Fairclough Manor, the hidden panel, the reagents, the discreet grooves. Whoever they were, they had intimate access. The handwriting matched neither Lady Estelle's delicate script, nor Dr. Bennett's neat print, nor the scrawl of Moore or Wyndham. It was slender, precise, and confident, the same as the summons letter. He compared the letters, identical loops on the letter G, matching flourishes on T. The culprit had documented their plan, hidden both instructions and toxins behind botanical metaphors. But why record it here? Perhaps out of hubris, or as a backup should they fail. Yet that would risk discovery by an intruder. It indicated someone certain. No one would find it someone who believed their knowledge of the manor absolute. He considered each suspect's knowledge. Lady Estelle knew the gardens and library intimately. Dr. Bennett knew botanical toxins. Moore knew exotic plant dealers. Wyndham knew hidden compartments from assisting Lionel in managing the estate. Clara knew the Bluebell shop's stock and perhaps the gardens. All had motive and access. Yet only one combined horticultural savvy with architectural familiarity, and the audacity to breach the library. Poirot closed the booklet. He would need to confront his suspects swiftly, but with a subtlety befitting the clandestine game. The secret clue had been uncovered, but the secret hand remained at large. He returned the crest seal, the violet powder, and the booklet into an envelope marked for tomorrow's confrontation. Sealing it with wax. Exiting the library, Poirot paused at its threshold, taking one final look at the carved petals framing. The bookcase, in those oak blooms, lay the final gateway to truth. He descended the staircase with measured steps, ready to gather his suspects once more. The next conversation would expose the architect of poison, the mastermind behind mind games, bring to light the identity of the wielder of the hidden dagger within the petals. Chapter 11. Tensions rise. The morning light filtered weakly through leaded panes as Hercule Poirot convened the group once more in the oak-panelled drawing-room. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing the hearth, where embers still glowed from the night's dying fire. The atmosphere felt charged. Each suspect arrived bearing the weight of sleepless hours and mounting suspicion. Miss Clara Everton entered first, her grey frock wrinkle-free, but her eyes rimmed with fatigue. She paused at the threshold, glancing at the empty chairs, and then seated herself near the window, as though seeking comfort in the pale garden light. Lady Estelle Fairclough followed, her lavender gloves now removed, revealing slender hands that tapped restlessly against the arm of her chair. Dr. Cyrus Bennet, Edward Moore, and William Wyndham completed the circle, each warily eyeing the others as they settled into place. Poirot stood before them, the sealed envelope marked for tomorrow's confrontation in his gloved hands. He laid it gently on a small side table beside a silver tray with 2 decanters, one of claret, one of sherry, and 5 crystal tumblers. Then he turned, surveying his audience. "Miss Amos," he began, voice measured, "last evening I discovered a hidden compartment in our own library concealed behind a carved floral panel. Within lay this booklet of clandestine notes and a vial of violet-hued powder, evidence of yet another poison, and instructions for revealing the secret. The author of these documents is the same who penned the Bluebell card and the summons." He paused, letting the realization sink in. Miss Everton's breath caught. Lady Estelle's lips parted. Dr. Bennet's fingers twitched. Moore's jaw tightened, and Wyndham's face grew drawn. Poirot continued, "We have progressed from initial clues to false leads, to psychological probing, to thwarted assassinations, and now to this private instructions left by our culprit. The question before us this morning is not only who wished to kill, but who was confident enough to document their crimes within these walls, certain that no one would find them." He opened the envelope, revealing the pressed violet powder and the miniature booklet embossed with the dagger in Petal's crest. "Observe the powder's composition, digitalis-based, a third toxin alongside atropine and oconutine. 3 methods, 3 messages. Our architect of death is thorough, ruthless, and daring." He set the vial on the table. "Now, Miss Amos, it is time to consider who among you had the knowledge to collect and confidence to conceal such diverse poisons, and the familiarity with this manner to hide documents in the library's secret panel." Lady Estelle's hand fluttered too. Her throat, she drew a shuddering breath. "Monsieur Poirot, botanical poisons are Dr. Bennet's expertise. He alone has the facilities and knowledge to handle digitalis. Double quotes, Dr. Bennet's cheeks flushed. He stood abruptly, almost overturning his chair. Madame, I assure you, Digitalis is as familiar to me as any pharmacy student, but not all poisons require a laboratory. One need only know Saucismus. Everton's shop imports exotic blooms. Mr. Moore procures rare plants, and Mr. Wyndham oversees the manor's secret spaces. Edward Moore shot to his feet. You implicate me because I import orchids and rare bulbs. I purchased those legally for my herbarium. I have never dealt in toxins. Wyndham rose as well, voice low and controlled. And you accuse me because I served as legal steward of this estate. I draft wills, not murder plots. Poirot lifted a gloved finger to preserve order. Calm, si vous plot. Accusations made in haste are rarely precise. He turned to Miss Everton. Mademoiselle, your shop's stock includes bluebells, harmless to most yet poisoned with atropine. But you also source violets. Why? Violets are not a typical inventory item. Clara's lips trembled. I stock violets occasionally, but not when bluebells are in season. Sir, I did not hide Digitalis in my shop. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Nevertheless, the presence of pressed violet powder here together with instructions, written in this precise handwriting, suggests intimate knowledge of both flowers and the manor's architecture. He stepped closer to the group. Let me remind you of the secrets to parts, botanical mastery and secret panels. The author knew how to harvest Digitalis, how to press and store violet powder, and how to sketch a diagram of the library bookcase complete with the hidden notch. Such a feat demands both horticultural acumen and familiarity with the manors. Inner workings rooms, few are allowed to enter unescorted. He fixed his gaze on William Wyndham. You, as solicitor, had access to the entire house, including private studies and locked archives. But your legal duties seldom took you behind the carved library panel. You are learned in statutes, not secret panels. Wyndham's forehead glistened. He swallowed and sat heavily, gazed downward. Poirot turned to Edward Moore. You, sir, walk these halls often, but I have seen you linger in the library only during social gatherings. Your interests lie elsewhere in land, in commerce. You would notice no hidden compartments unless told of them. Moore bristled but did not stand. I was in the library at odd hours research for my botany journal earlier this week. I discovered the panel by accident pressed, where a vine carving protruded, but I did not open it. He glanced at Lady Estelle. I mentioned this too. Her in confidence. Lady Estelle drew in a sharp breath. You showed me the notch, but we both agreed it was likely a decorative anomaly, not a mechanism. We had no reason to believe in a secret shelf until now. Poirot's eyes narrowed on Lady Estelle. Madame, you know the garden's rare blooms, and you have known the library for decades. You guided Miss Everton through the grounds. You marked the best violets. If anyone could blend botanical knowledge with manor secrets, you. Lady Estelle's hand shook as she lifted a trembling glass of sherry. No, yes, I know the garden, but I am not a murderer. Perhaps not. Poirot agreed. But consider this. The pressed violet note and the diagram were likely written by someone who believed their secret was safe. A person of status, accustomed to confidence. Someone Lily in her youth, fearless in her ambitions. He looked beyond her. Lady Estelle's face paled. Who speaks of Lily? A hush fell. Clara's breath caught, and the others leaned forward. Eyes wide, Poirot's lips curved. Ah, Mies, Amos. Each of you harbors a hidden identity. But Lily, a childhood nickname of Miss Clara Everton, given by Lady Estelle when she served as companion, gasps filled the room. Clara rose, aghast. "That is my childhood name. How can you know?" Poirot's grey eyes gleamed. The booklet's preface is signed with the initials L.E., not for Lady Estelle, but for Lady Elizabeth Fairclough, Lady Estelle's birth name. She used Lily as a signature in private notes to her companion, Clara. The diagram. In the gardening journal, the pressed violet all bears L.E. in scarcely perceptible script. Silence swelled as the revelation sank in. Lady Estelle's shoulders drooped. She glanced at Clara, sorrow in her eyes. I did not intend this. I meant to protect my family. I pressed the violet as a marker to show only Lionel, my nephew, that I knew of his secret meeting place. I never dreamed the plan would include poison." Poirot's voice was gentle, yet firm. "Yet the booklet bears, more than diagrams, outlines the 3 poisons, their sources, and the precise scheduling. Bluebells at dawn, decanter at dusk, and a third in the hearts of the fearful. Only the author could combine family, crests, childhood tokens, and clandestine knowledge in such a way." Tears filled Lady Estelle's eyes. She clasped her hands. "It was me. I wanted to frighten Lionel too, force him to reconsider diverting funds to the Children's Guild. I thought a warning would be enough. But he did not come, and I did not realize someone else had tampered with the plan." Clara rose and crossed to Lady Estelle's side. "Madam, I forgive you. But Lionel could have died." Poirot bowed his head. "The truth has emerged, though through perilous paths. Mies Amos, this circle of suspects, held one whose affection and fear drove her to extremes. Yet it was loyalty to family and to tradition that shaped her design." He turned to the others. "Dr. Bennet, Mr. Moore, Mr. Wyndham, thank you for bearing witness. You may all leave the manor at your discretion. Mademoiselle Everton, I trust your shop will flourish honestly now." As Lady Estelle wept, the group dispersed, leaving Poirot alone in the drawing-room. He gazed upon the flickering embers, 3 poisons, a single culprit, and a hidden clue pressed in a violet. The tapestry of deception had unravelled, revealing a heart both tender and misguided. Justice and mercy would follow in due course. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall mullioned windows of Fairclough Manor's drawing-room as Hercule Poirot summoned the assembled group for a most critical exchange. The furniture had been rearranged into a U-shape, with 5 chairs facing a central spot marked by a small walnut pedestal table. Upon it rested the leather-bound booklet embossed with the 5-petaled dagger crest, the phial of violet powder, and the shattered stopper from the poisoned decanter. One by one, the suspects entered under the butler's discreet escort. Miss Clara Everton took her place nearest the table, eyes vigilant. Dr. Cyrus Bennet paused briefly at the door, his footsteps measured, then settled at the right. Edward Moore followed, face tense, and William Wyndham next, composure forced. Last came Lady Estelle Fairclough, her lavender gown, once regal, now muted by remorse. She hesitated before taking the central chair directly opposite Poirot, as though uncertain she belonged. Poirot stood before them, his posture impeccable, moustache impeccably waxed. He allowed a silence to fall, letting his gaze rest upon each face, drawing out the collective unease. Finally, he spoke in his precise English, tinged with Belgian warmth. "Mies Amos, We have reached the point at which words alone will not suffice. The truth, hidden, deceiving, entwined with affection and fear must be drawn forth by the careful application of pressure. I intend now to confront directly the most culpable among you, and to reveal the fatal contradiction in her story. He turned to Lady Estelle. Madame, you have admitted to orchestrating the bluebell delivery and preparing the decanter ruse, though you claimed the intent was mere warning. Yet you withheld crucial information from anyone else, that you possessed the key to this manor's secret panel, and that you recorded your plans within it. Why conceal this detail even from your closest confidants? Lady Estelle's pale lips trembled. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Silence stretched. Poirot came closer, his voice gentle but unyielding. Fear, madame, can drive one to hide the means as well as the motive. But fear is not a crime only. The act of poisoning is, tell us, when you pressed the violet you left a fingerprint upon the phial, did you assume that only your own hands, unrecorded by servants, would ever touch it? Lady Estelle's eyes darted to the vial on the table. She lifted a quivering hand as if to cover it, then let it fall. I did not think, she stammered. I believed the note would suffice. He would see the violet, know my hand, and heed my warning. Poirot inclined his head. A sophisticated warning, indeed. Yet you overlooked one critical factor. The violet powder was mixed with digitalis, a poison unrelated to your expertise. Who supplied that? Who ground those leaves to dust? A single bead of sweat formed at Lady Estelle's temple. She swallowed. I thought the violet symbol alone would frighten him. I did not add poison. I never touched the digitalis. He turned to Dr. Bennet. Doctor, is it possible you provided the digitalis? Dr. Bennet's hand jerked. He looked down at his lap and swallowed. Digitalis. I keep it for research. Yes, but Madame never came to my laboratory. Poirot's eyes flicked to Moore. Mr. Moore, you import exotic plants. Digitalis could have been among your shipments. Does that not concern you? Moore's jaw tightened. I sold only whole plant saw dried specimens for horticultural study. I did not process any into powder. William Wyndham cleared his throat. Monsieur Poirot, perhaps we overlook the origin, the staff pantries. Some servants collect violets and press them as tokens for Lady Estelle. A discreet helper, someone with loyalty, might have pressed the powder without her knowledge. Gaze sharpened, then shifted back to Lady Estelle. Ah, Monsieur Wyndham, a plausible diversion. And yet Madame here was seen lingering near the library panel late last night, as Mrs. Carstairs confirmed. You know that no one else had access to the secret compartment. Lady Estelle's gaze flickered to Wyndham, panic edged in her eyes. That was to retrieve the gardening journal. I wanted to revisit my own notes on the ball arrangements. She wiped her palms on her skirts. I never intended to use any powder. Poirot inclined his head once more. A credible explanation if the journal had not vanished from the panel. The moment after you left, Mrs. Carstairs saw you open it, then observed the bookcase swing shut behind you. When I inspected later, the journal had been replaced by this booklet, our murderer's own manuscript. He lifted the embossed booklet. Therefore, madame, someone followed you into the library, removed your journal, and substituted these notes. Only then could the true author hide their instructions. In plain sight, disguised as Lady Estelle's gardening aid. Lady Estelle gasped. She sank forward, clutching the arms of her chair. You mean I was manipulated? Poirot's grey eyes were gentle, not manipulated, but outwitted. Your skill with flowers and knowledge of this house made you the perfect decoy. Yet the real culprit needed you to believe your plan would succeed unobserved. He turned to Dr. Bennet. Doctor, you had motive to silence Lionel's will changes, and the medical expertise to suggest poison methods. You knew of the groove in the desk to test for atropine and of digitalis effect on the heart. You also possess the skill in your laboratory to grind the violet into powder. True, Dr. Bennet's breath hitched. He glanced at the digitalis vial on the table. I studied digitalis for heart conditions. I tested small samples. Yes, but only to calibrate dosages. And yet, Poirot pressed, you left no traces in the lab-destroying records to conceal your research. When Lady Estelle discovered the panel, you seized the opportunity to bury your own instructions beneath hers. He paced slowly. You wrote the bluebell note, using a crest you designed based on the valley violet, your mother's favorite. Flower, you noted the hidden panel in the gardening journal's margin, next to Lady Estelle's pressed violet. You summoned Lionel to the study with that second letter, fully expecting to incapacitate him with a When he failed to appear, you abandoned the decanter plan, then rewrote the booklet to include your 3 toxins, confident no one would suspect a doctor's hand. Dr. Bennet's face went chalky. He rose, voice trembling. It had to be done. He would divert the infirmary's funds. Lives were at stake. I thought Poirot raised a gloved hand. You thought you were justified in murder for the greater good, but in doing so, you betrayed the Hippocratic oath. In using Lady Estelle's scheme as cover, you believed her innocence would shield you until now. Dr. Bennet's shoulders sagged. He sank back into his chair, eyes downcast. I underestimated her. And you? Poirot nodded gravely. So, Dr. Bennet, will you accompany Sergeant Higgins to the library to retrieve your former journal and surrender yourself to justice? Below the drawing room, footsteps approached as Sergeant Higgins met Poirot's discreet signal. Dr. Bennet rose slowly, hands shaking, and followed the sergeant out. Pausing briefly to meet Lady Estelle's sorrowful gaze, he offered a trembling nod of apology before disappearing down the corridor. Silence settled. Only Poirot and Lady Estelle remained. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes. Monsieur Poirot, I am so sorry. I never wished harm. Poirot placed a consoling hand on her. Shoulder, intent, and consequence are separate matters, madame. Your plan was flawed, but your heart, though misguided, meant mercy. The true culprit acted with resolve, and that is a heavier burden. He turned to Mrs. Carstairs, who had entered unseen, and instructed her to restore calm and ensure Lady Estelle's comfort. Then, alone in the hushed room, he closed the booklet and the feel of violet powder, knowing the final puzzle still awaited, but that today's confrontation had unmasked the architect of deception. The path to justice and to true resolution stood before him, its final steps within reach. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The hush of late afternoon had settled once more over Fairclough Manor when Hercule Poirot received a discreet knock at the door of his temporary study. He looked up from arranging his notes and found Sergeant Higgins standing in the doorway, flanked by the guard, who had accompanied Dr. Bennet. Monsieur, the sergeant murmured, Dr. Bennet has requested permission to retrieve a personal item from his laboratory. He claims it is essential for his case preparations. Poirot's grey eyes narrowed. He rose and closed the journal he had been studying. Very well, Sergeant, but I shall accompany him myself. We shall ensure no tampering occurs." Together, Poirot and Sergeant Higgins made their way through the manor's corridors toward the laboratory nestled in the east wing. The corridors were quiet, the afternoon light dimming as clouds drifted across the sky. At the laboratory door, the guard produced the key provided by Dr. Bennet earlier that morning. Poirot's ever-alert gaze caught the slightest tremor in the guard's hand, sign of apprehension. He exchanged a quick nod with Sergeant Higgins, and together they pushed the door open. Inside, the laboratory was precisely as Bennet had left it. Glass vials lined on shelves, a workbench cluttered with notebooks, and a small cabinet where the doctor kept his most sensitive materials. Dr. Bennet stood by the cabinet, his face ashen, his lab coat stained faintly with residue from earlier tests. "Monsieur Poirot," Bennet said, voice tight, "thank you. The item I seek is in that drawer." He pointed to the left, "My personal medical records and reagent calibration logs. I require them for my defense." Poirot stepped forward, inspecting the drawer's lock. "Open it, Doctor." Bennet produced a slender key and unlocked the drawer. He lifted out a leather-bound folder and clutched it to his chest. Poirot observed every movement, the doctor's gloved hand resting on the folder's spine, the slight sheen of perspiration. On his brow, as Bennet turned, Poirot noticed a small vial hidden behind his backer, clear glass phial with a narrow neck. Its contents shimmered faintly a pale yellow liquid. Poirot's heart tightened. The vial matched none of Bennet's known reagents. "Monsieur Poirot," Bennet said, voice soft. Before he could finish, Bennet bolted past them, vaulting over the workbench with surprising agility. The vial fell from his hand, shattering on the tiled floor, its contents hissing as they spilled onto the bench and dripped toward the drain. "Stop him," Poirot cried. Sergeant Higgins lunged forward, but Bennet was swift. He burst through the laboratory door and into the corridor, clutching the folder in one hand. His lab coat fluttered as he raced toward the deserted West Wing stairs. Poirot and Higgins gave chase. The echo of their footsteps mingled with the distant tolling of the manor's clock. Down the corridor, past closed doors and looming portraits, they pursued Bennet, who seemed determined to vanish into the gloom halfway down the stairs. Bennet turned a corner and vanished from sight. Poirot, breathing steadily, signalled to Higgins, "Split up. He must not leave the grounds." Sergeant Higgins ran left, while Poirot took the rightward passage leading toward the greenhouse. The glass panes were streaked with condensation, the interior a haze of tropical plants. Bennet emerged into the greenhouse, the folder held tight to his chest. He paused among the banana trees, chest heaving, eyes darting. Poirot entered silently behind him. "Dr. Bennet," Poirot said gently, "you need not run." Bennet whirled, clutching the folder defensively. "I must destroy it. Destroy all evidence. My notes, my logs, they will condemn me." Poirot stepped closer, hands raised in non-threatening gesture. "Your defensive logs are yours to preserve for trial. But this folder," he pointed with a finger, "holds personal correspondence that could harm others. Is that what you fear?" Bennet's shoulders slumped. He glanced at the broken vial fragments scattered on the bench. In the laband, then, at the drip of yellow liquid disappearing down the drain. His eyes filled with despair. "I never meant to kill more than necessary. I needed to cover my tracks, to protect those I cared for." Poirot's expression softened. "Mon ami, there is no saving oneself through further wrongdoing. You have confessed, and the evidence collected will speak your guilt. Yet honesty in court may lighten your burden. Bennet lowered the folder, tears in his eyes. They will take everything from my reputation, my career, perhaps my freedom. Poirot's grey eyes were steady. Yes, but you sought mercy through misdeeds. Now you must accept justice tempered by compassion. Come, let us return to the study. It is time for Respitan for your trial proceedings. Bennet slumped, exhausted, and allowed Higgins to approach and place a firm hand on his elbow. Together, the three walked back through the greenhouse and along the corridor as they passed under a lantern. Poirot noticed the faint glow of a new manuscript tucked under Bennet's armor-slim notebook with unmarked pages. It escaped Bennet's grasp when Higgins took hold and fluttered to the floor. Poirot stooped and picked it up. "Sergeant, ensure this goes into evidence. We must examine every page." Higgins nodded, and together they continued to the study. The distant crunch of footsteps on gravel reached their ears as the sun dipped behind the horizon. Manners, shadows lengthened, but inside, the path to resolution grew clearer, the desperate attempt to escape thwarted, and the pieces of the mystery drawn ever closer to completion. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The morning light crept into the library's tall windows as Hercule Poirot gathered the remaining fragments of the case upon the central reading table. The scattered notes, shattered vials, and confiscated journals formed a mosaic of evidence. One final piece remained elusive. 5 suspects now sat waiting in the drawing room. Lady Estelle across from Poirot, Miss Clara Everton at her side, Dr. Bennet confined under guard, and Edward Moore and William Wyndham flanking them. Each bore the fatigue of sleepless nights and the weight of revelation. Poirot laid before them the leather notebook retrieved from Dr. Bennet's escape attempt. Its unmarked pages seemed innocuous, yet it held a significance all its own. He opened to the first page, revealing blank paper until, at the very end, a single line written in a fine, neat script: "The end blooms where the violet fades." He tapped the line with a gloved fingertip. This is the final clue, author's own riddle. We have seen violets pressed as markers, digitalis ground to powder, and drawings of hidden panels. Yet this line directs us to where conclusion meets confession. The end blooms. He glanced up. What blooms at the end of our investigation? Miss Everton's brow furrowed. The garden's late flowering iris and the rose arbor. Lady Estelle shook her head. No end blooms. The final flower of the season is the winter aconite, but that blooms in early spring. Poirot's moustache twitched in amusement. Plausible botanical musings. Yet consider symbolism. A confession blooms when the guilty heart breaks the divulging of truth. Where might one reveal a confession hidden as a blossom? He paused, drawing their attention to the hearth behind him. There, in an ornamented brass vase, sat a single fresh violet, its petals deep purple, unmistakable among the harsher lines of metal and stone. Dr. Bennet's eyes darted to the vase. He inhaled sharply. That violet, how did it get there? I did not place it. Edward Moore leaned forward. It wasn't in the vase when we arrived. William Wyndham's hand fluttered to his throat. A fresh bloom, not pressed, meant to draw attention. Poirot nodded. Exactly. The culprit anticipated our attention to the library's old violets. They left this living blossom as the end bloom, a signal directing us to the vase, and by extension to its contents. He stepped to the hearth and lifted the violet, examining its stem. At its base, wrapped tightly, was a small scrap of parchment. He unwrapped it and read aloud, "Forgive the mess, dear nephew, but blood cannot be poured from an empty cup. A hush fell. Poirot folded the note and turned to Lady Estelle. Madame, you intended a warning using violet powder and garden notes. Yet someone returned tonight to leave this final message, a confession disguised as guilt. Blood cannot be poured from an empty cup, a metaphor for coercion without consent. Who might write such a line? Lady Estelle pressed a hand to her breast. I do not understand. Poirot's gaze moved to Dr. Bennet. Doctor, you were prepared to flee, convinced your defense would crumble. This note, then, is not your handwriting to Florid for your scientific script. The flourishing cup is more elaborate than your usual form. Dr. Bennet swallowed. Then Poirot looked to Moore. Mr. Moore, your handwriting practices formal letterheads, straightforward, bold. This script is delicate, almost feminine. Moore glanced at Wyndham. William Wyndham cleared his throat. My handwriting is precise, but functional. No flourish. I see none of my habitual loops here. Poirot's eyes returned to Lady Estelle. Madame, consider your own habits. You sign letters to Clara with Lily, an affectionate flourish, a curl on the Y. This note's loops mirror those precisely. He stepped closer. And you, having rescued yourself from suspicion, now use this final bloom to summon sympathy, disguising your own guilt as a plea for forgiveness. Lady Estelle's shoulders slumped. She closed her eyes, tears brimming. Monsieur Poirot. Yes, it was I. After learning of Dr. Bennet's flight, I realized my own scheme had become embroiled in his. I believed that by planting this confession note, I might soften Lionel's heart or at least secure my own redemption. Clara crossed to her side. Madame, you risked all by revealing the confession here. She glanced between Lady Estelle and Poirot. Why now, when the danger is past? Lady Estelle's voice trembled. Because I could not live with Thebaden of having nearly destroyed my nephew. I had to speak, if only in a way that disguised the admission as someone else's guilt. I pressed a living violet as the final bloom, believing the tender symbol would mask my hand. Poirot offered a gentle nod. The riddle's solution lay not in horticulture, but in human nature. Regret blooms when remorse cannot be silenced. You chose the vase by the hearth close to the heart of this house, hoping your message would be found by kin, not by detective. He folded the parchment and placed both note and violet into an envelope. You have confessed, madame, and in doing so, you have freed yourself from your silent terror. Yet the question remains, who orchestrated the final attempt to escape? All eyes turned to Dr. Bennet. He looked down, shame etched on his face. I panicked. My flight was impulsive fear, overriding reason. There was no accomplice. Poirot's gaze softened as he addressed Bennet. Your attempt to flee spoke only of fear for your own actions. With Lady Estelle's confession now revealed, no further accusations stand. The final piece the living. Violet was your aunt's last admission. He turned to the assembled group. Thus Mies, Amos, the circle is complete. 3 poisons, layered deceptions, hidden panels, and at last the bloom of confession. The end blooms where the violet fades. He paused, letting his words resonate. Tomorrow we shall gather for the final assembly, but today we honor both truth and mercy. As Lady Estelle bowed her head, Clara placed a hand on her arm in solidarity. Edward Moore and William Wyndham exchanged solemn nods, and Dr. Bennet sat quietly, the weight of revelation heavy upon him. Poirot inhaled a steadying breath, glancing once more at the empty vase and the final bloom's petals. The pieces had fallen into place, and soon the grand reveal would bring both justice and resolution to Clough. Manners, Dark Chapter, Chapter 15. The final gathering late morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Fairclough Manors. Grand drawing room, illuminating the gathered company. A semicircle of chairs had been arranged before the heavy velvet drapes. Lady Estelle Fairclough, still pale but composed. Miss Clara Everton, her expression resolute. Dr. Cyrus Bennet, seated under a discreet guard. Edward Moore, arms folded. And William Wyndham, sitting stiffly. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the room beside a small table upon which lay the key items of evidence, the leather-bound booklet, the 3 poison vials, atropine, aconitine, digitalis, the torn coat lining, and the final living violet. Poirot surveyed his audience with grave solemnity, his little grey cells alight with the culmination of weeks of inquiry. He cleared his throat softly and began, "Mes Amis, we have convened here at the end of our long and trying investigation. Each of you has borne witness to events both subtle and shocking. The delivery of poisoned bluebells, the attempted murder by tainted wine, the hidden instructions in the library's secret panel, the psychological tests, and finally, personal confessions and attempted escape. Today, we reconstruct the true sequence of events to reveal how one among you wove these disparate threads into one deadly tapestry." He picked up the bluebell card, sealed in navy wax. At dawn on April 12th, a woman in mourning, Lady Estelle, herself delivered fresh bluebells to her florist, Miss Everton, under the guise of a secret plea. In truth, the card's instructions concealed a demand for Lionel Fairclough to reconsider his charitable reallocation. The bluebells were dusted with atropine in Dr. Bennet's laboratory, but he tested them only to verify their danger, not to concoct them. The true architect of this act prepared the bluebells, knowing that Clara Everton's hand would carry them to Fairclough Manor. Clara's eyes widened, but she nodded stiffly. Poirot continued. At noon, the bluebells arrived at the manor. Dr. Bennet discovered the poison, but correctly identified it as a routine calibration test. Meanwhile, a torn lining scrap planted on the gate misled Sergeant Higgins to suspect Dr. Bennet when, in fact, it belonged to Mr. Edward Moore's spare coat, mended after a tear. This was a calculated diversion. He placed the scrap beside the card. At 8 that evening, the poisoner summoned Lionel to the study with a second letter. He anticipated finding the decanter alone and slipped aconitine into the claret. He did not count on Mrs. Carstairs' timely intervention, nor on Lady Estelle stumbling upon the scene and leaving the stopper shattered as both warning and accusation. Lady Estelle's gaze reddened. Poirot's tone remained gentle. "It was you who discovered the decanter, madame, and you left it intact to serve as a signal. Yet you did not realize the plan to poison Lionel had been set by a second hand drawn from knowledge of the library's hidden panel and the ornamental vase by the hearth." He lifted the living violet and parchment. That living violet appeared next morning, marking the final bloom your own confession disguised as someone else's guilt. "Blood cannot be poured from an empty cup," you wrote, hoping to soften Lionel's heart. But by then, the true mastermind had already moved on to their last measure. Turning, Poirot produced the leather booklet from Dr. Bennet's lab. Within this concealed manuscript lay instructions for 3 poisons, notes on botanical vessels, and diagrams of the secret compartment. Its author believed these pages would never be discovered. They did not foresee Lady Estelle's intervention. nor my perusal of the vault beneath the carved panel. He placed the booklet beside the violet. Now, mes amis, let us examine the motives that drove each of these acts. He addressed Lady Estelle first. You sought to frighten Lionel, to halt his plans for the Children's Guild, and to preserve funds for the artisans' ball. Your compassion was genuine, but misdirected. When you saw him absent from the study, you panicked and left the decanter, as message never guessing that a second party would exploit your plan. Lady Estelle bowed her head. I see now how my fear blinded me. Poirot then turned to Dr. Bennet. Doctor, you calibrated atropine and possessed digitalis for medical research. Yet you did not author the violet powder. Your hand was never traced to that final flourish. Your attempt to flee demonstrated remorse. You tested the laboratory's reagents for safety, not for mass murder. Bennet exhaled. I confess my fears, but not the crafting of the violet. Poirot nodded and faced Edward Moore. Mr. Moore, your land negotiations intersected with the artisan's ball, but you neither harvested bluebells nor pressed violets. You acquired rare specimens, yes, but you sold them openly through Miss Everton's shop. Your torn lining scrap was a red herring, yet your actions were honourable thereafter. Moore inclined his head. I meant no harm. Finally, Poirot turned to William Wyndham. And you, Mr. Wyndham, solicitor to the family, knew of hidden clauses in the will, and had unfettered access to every room in this manner. You drafted power of attorney documents for Lionel's brother, learned every secret panel, and oversaw the estate's confidential archives. You alone possessed both the botanical knowledge acquired through Lady Estelle's gifts of rare blooms and the temporal opportunity to enter the library unobserved. Wyndham's composed facade cracked. He stood, voice trembling. Monsieur Poirot, I cared for the family name, but I could not allow Lionel to divert these funds. The violet symbol, my mother's favourite flower, has long held meaning. For me, I pressed the powder not for revenge, but to force his hand. Poirot's eyes softened. Yet you used my friend's aunt as unwitting accomplice, directing suspicion to others. You counted on Dr. Bennet's professional compost tests, on Moore's coat lining, on Lady Estelle's secrecy. You authored the booklet, planted the notes, and left the final violet as your signature. Wyndham's shoulders slumped. He sank into his chair. Yes, I thought I could control the outcome. But when Lady Estelle intervened and when I saw her distress, I realized I had gone too far. A hush fell. Poirot folded his hands. Mies, Amos, we have untangled the web. The primary architect of poison was Mr. William Wyndham, using love of family and fear of change as motive. His actions nearly claimed to lives and crushed many more. He straightened. Dr. Bennet, you may go free of suspicion, though you will need counsel. Lady Estelle, you acted out of misguided compassion. You will face consequences, but your confession carries weight. Mr. Moore and Miss Everton, your integrity remains intact. Miss Everton exhaled, relief washing over her. Moore offered a respectful bow. Lady Estelle looked to Wyndham with compassionate sorrow. Poirot concluded, let justice follow, tempered by mercy where it may. The little grey cells have done their work. Now it falls to Lionel Fairclough and to the courts to deliver final judgment. He nodded to Sergeant Higgins, who stepped forward to place Wyndham under formal arrest. As the solicitor was gently escorted away, the draw of morning light through the windows seemed less chilling, and Fairclough Manor's long shadow of deceit began to lift, revealing at last the fragile peace that follows truth. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Late afternoon light filtered through the mullioned windows of Fairclough Manor as Hercule Poirot summoned all present for the moment they had long awaited, the unmasking of the true culprit. The grand drawing-room, once a stage for suspicion and subterfuge, was now arranged for clarity and confession. A semicircle of chairs faced Poirot's small podium, atop which rested the critical items of evidence: the leather-bound booklet, the trio of poison vials, the torn lining scrap, and the fresh violet. Seated before him were Lady Estelle Fairclough, her composure restored, though grief still clouded. Her eyes, Miss Clara Everton, poised and alert. Dr. Cyrus Bennet, his hands folded in contrition. Edward Moore, his posture eased with relief, and the household's remaining staff, assembled quietly at the back. The hush that fell was thick. With anticipation and lingering dread, Poirot cleared his throat. Mies Amos, we are gathered for the reveal, the definitive exposition of how this intricate plot unfolded, and why Mr. William Wyndham, solicitor to the Fairclough estate, stood at its heart. He paused to allow the words to settle. He raised the torn lining scrap. First, the diversion. Mr. Moore's spare coat lining was chosen to mislead Sergeant Higgins, and, indeed, it did. That scrap was cut deliberately during Moore's late-night inspection of the gate lamp, orchestrated by our culprit to direct suspicion away from himself and onto the unsuspecting physician. Dr. Bennet's eyes flickered, but he remained silent. Moore bowed his head. Poirot continued. With this initial misdirection in place, our culprit turned to the bluebell note. Using botanical knowledge gleaned from Lady Estelle's garden and from Moore's exotic plant shipments, he procured atropine and clandestinely dusted a bouquet of bluebells destined for Miss Everton's shop. He calculated that Clara's delivery of the flowers would deliver the poison directly to Fairclough Manor, testing Lionel's defences. Clara's gaze dropped to the floor. Poirot then lifted the decanter stopper. When the bluebell plan faltered, discovered by Dr. Bennet's reagent, the plan shifted. A second letter summoned Lionel to the study at 8 o'clock. The decanter of claret was prepared with aconitine, laid out alone on the mahogany desk. Yet fate intervened. Mrs. Carstairs discovered the scene and inadvertently thwarted the attempt, leaving the stopper shattered as both evidence and confusion. Lady Estelle pressed her hand to her chest. Poirot's voice remained calm. At this juncture, our culprit recognized that a third measure was needed, not merely to kill, but to command undue influence over Lionel's decisions. The secret panel in the library presented the perfect hiding place for a dossier. A leather-bound booklet outlining 3 poisons: atropine, aconitine, and digitalisand, the precise botanical symbols corresponding to each. He placed the booklet before them. With this manual hidden in plain sight, camouflaged as Lady Estelle's gardening notes, the murderer believed his blueprint would never be discovered. But Lady Estelle's misplaced journal, taken by the culprit and replaced with this volume, betrayed his confidence. Poirot turned to the fresh violet in the brass vase. Finally, the living violet served as the end bloom, a flourish of confession penned by the culprit himself. The line "blood cannot be poured from an empty cup" was crafted to manipulate sympathy, to cloak guilt in remorse. Yet the handwriting revealed the author's identity, the same distinctive loops and curls that appeared in Mr. Wyndham's private notes. He stepped closer to Wyndham, now seated under the watchful eyes of 2 guards. Mr. Wyndham, or should I say Mr. William Henry Wyndham, you exploited your unique position as solicitor and archivist. You knew every hidden panel, every private corridor, and you wielded botanical suppliers, Ms. Everton's shop and Moore's exotic imports, to acquire your poisons. Your motive was clear. Lionel's planned redirection of funds from legacy beneficiaries, including yourself, to the Children's Guild threatened your share in the estate. As stipulated in the superseded codicil you once drafted, Wyndham's shoulders sagged and he raised his eyes to Poirot. Yes, he whispered, I feared losing not only my inheritance, but my place within this family. It drove me to desperation. Poirot nodded. Desperation that led you to 3 calculated attempts on life. Yet each act carried flaws from miscalculated timings to reliance on others' secrecy. In your arrogance, you believed that burying your guidebook in a false panel would shield you, and you misjudged Lady Estelle's compassion and my own persistence. He addressed the assembled company. This Mies, Amos, is the reveal, the methodical progression from misdirection to direct assault, to clandestine documentation, to final confession. The murderer's hand is exposed, and the path to justice is clear. For a moment, no one stirred. Then Miss Everton rose. Monsieur Poirot, if these are the facts, I, along with the rest, stand relieved that the danger has ended. We owe you our deepest gratitude. Poirot bowed elegantly. It has been my honor to serve you, yet the story does not end here. Lionel Fairclough himself must now determine how the land mercy shall be applied. Lady Estelle stepped forward, voice wavering. I must apologize to Lionel when he returns. My own complicity, though of a different nature, has caused him anguish. Dr. Bennet approached Poirot. I will resume my duties with renewed humility and ensure my research remains in service of healing, not harm. Moore and the household. Staff murmured their relief. The large mirrors and gilt frames that once reflected suspicion now bore silent witness to vindication. Finally, Poirot offered a parting remark. Mies Amos, let this be a lesson. Pride and fear, when left unchecked, can bloom into tragedy. But truth and a compassionate heart will always prevail. The little grey cells have spoken. Now may reason, justice, and forgiveness guide Fairclough Manor into a peaceful future. With that, he gathered his evidence, turning to leave the room as the company allowed themselves gentle tears and quiet embraces. Beyond the windows, the late sun shone upon the gardens where once poisoned blooms had sown terror. Now, clean air and honest resolve promised renewal. The grand reveal was complete and, at last, the mystery of the violet dagger and poisoned heart lay laid to rest. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The following morning, a solemn calm settled over Fairclough Manor. The great house, once animated by hushed whispers and furtive glances, now stood in dignified repose. Servants moved quietly through corridors, restoring order and preparing for the formal inquiries to come. In the oak-panelled drawing-room, Hercule Poirot arranged the final documents upon a mahogany side table, witness statements, the leather-bound booklet, and the sealed vial of violet powder. One by one, the principal figures of this tragic drama assembled. Lady Estelle Fairclough, newly restored to composure, took a seat beneath the tall windows. Miss Clara Everton, resolute and gracious, stood at her side. Dr. Cyrus Bennet, relieved of immediate suspicion yet chastened by his own errors, stood respectfully near the doorway. Edward Moore and William Wyndham, now under the careful watch of Sergeant Higgins, followed, and seated themselves in the line of witnesses. Outside, the county magistrate and a small team of constabulary awaited their turn to record formal testimonies, Poirot rose and addressed the quiet gathering. Mies, Amos, today we bring our inquiry before the magistrate. Let us proceed with clarity and candour, that justice may be served and mercy may temper the law where it can. He nodded to Sergeant Higgins, who stepped forward to guide Mr. Wyndham toward the awaiting procession of officials. Lady Estelle's hand trembled slightly as she smoothed her lavender gown. She inclined her head to Clara, whose reassuring smile bolstered her courage. Poirot offered them both a gentle nod. The first to give testimony was Lady Estelle. She spoke with measured dignity, recounting the moments she had unwittingly become entangled in a plot far darker than her own fears had imagined. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of remorse. I intended only to frighten Lionel into reconsidering his charitable allocations, she confessed. I never foresaw that a second party would seize upon my fear and turn it to murder. I accept full responsibility for my part, though I hope my confession and the mitigation of motive may be considered. Next, Dr. Bennet gave his account, focusing on his professional duties and the moral conflict that had led him to delay warning others of the poison. He expressed regret for any distress caused, but emphasized his fundamental commitment to healing. The magistrate listened intently, nodding as the doctor's words demonstrated contrition without evasion. Edward Moore, summoned to clarify his inadvertent involvement, described the torn coat lining episode with candor. He explained how he had damaged his spare lining and how the scrap came to mislead Sergeant Higgins. His honesty and swift cooperation earned him a respectful nod from the magistrate. As the testimonies progressed, it fell to William Wyndham to give his statement. Escorted by the sergeant, he stood before the magistrate, his shoulders bowed under the burden of guilt. He spoke haltingly, his voice thick with emotion. I acted out of fear for my inheritance and loyalty to the family name, he admitted. I believed Lionel's redirection of funds would ruin the legacy I served. I manipulated many the aunt I revered, the physician I respected, the florist whose friendship I took for granted in my misguided quest. I deserve whatever sentence the law permits. Poirot observed the magistrate's reaction as solemn. Folding of papers, a measured exhalation, a pause of consideration. When Wyndham concluded, the magistrate inclined his head gravely. Your candour is noted, Mr. Wyndham. The court will deliberate accordingly. Miss Everton, whose role had been that of unknowing courier, was then asked to speak. She recounted her morning of delivery, her fright at discovering poison, and her steadfast determination to protect both her shop and the manor's inhabitants. Her composed and heartfelt testimony underscored the virtue of compassion in the face of danger. With all parties heard, the magistrate closed his book. He thanked each witness for their honesty. The evidence is now complete, he declared. I will adjourn briefly to consider the statements and present a preliminary ruling. You may all retire to the drawing room until I return. A hush fell as the magistrate exited, followed by his clerks. The suspects and witnesses returned to their seats, glancing at one another with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Poirot closed his eyes momentarily, the little grey cells weighing the moral outcomes alongside the legal ones. Moments later, the magistrate re-entered. He seated himself behind the low dais and addressed the assembly. In light of the evidence, I find that Mr. William Wyndham did conspire to poison Lionel Fairclough, employing multiple toxins and layers of deceit. He confessed voluntarily and expressed genuine remorse. The court, guided by both law and compassion, sentences him to 5 years imprisonment with hard labour. reduced from the statutory maximum due to his full confession and the absence of actual fatalities. A murmur rippled through the room. Wyndham bowed his head in acceptance. The magistrate continued. Dr. Cyrus Bennet, though his actions contributed to confusion, did not intentionally partake in the murderous plot. His testimony and conduct warrant no penal sentence, but I recommend professional review by the medical board. Lady Estelle Fairclough, your moral culpability as a co-conspirator, though unintentional in fatal design, requires reprimand. This court imposes a fine of £100, representing reparations to the Bluebell estate and to the families of those imperiled. Lady Estelle inclined her head gravely. I accept the court's judgment, she said softly. Miss Everton, her relief evident, bowed in gratitude. Edward Moore and Dr. Bennet exchanged quiet nods. The magistrate offered final remarks on the importance of integrity and the perils of fear-driven actions. With the proceedings concluded, Sergeant Higgins escorted the guards to lead Wyndham away. Poirot rose quietly, approaching the magistrate. In low tones, he conveyed his confidence that Lionel Fairclough, upon his return, would secure a measure of mercy for his solicitor's loyal service. Tempered by betrayal, outside the sky had cleared, and sunlight danced upon the manor's gardens. The assembled company emerged into the courtyard, Lady Estelle and Clara together, Dr. Bennet and Moore conversing amicably, Poirot standing apart in thoughtful repose. The air, once heavy with suspicion, now shimmered with possibility. Clara turned to Poirot. Monsieur, my deepest thanks for guiding us through darkness to light. Poirot smiled, his moustache twitching. It has been a privilege, mademoiselle. May Fairclough Manor find peace once more. Lady Estelle, her eyes moist but determined, offered a trembling smile. I shall rebuild trust with Lionel, with Clara, with all who dwell here. Poirot inclined his head in farewell, and I shall carry with me the lesson that the heart's shadows can be brighter by the flame of truth. As he stepped away toward the manor gates, his silhouette framed by the morning sun, the great house behind him seemed to exhale its long ordeal at an end, its future restored by justice, by confession, and by the unwavering power of the little grey cells. Chapter 18. The closing remarkable afternoon sunlight bathed the courtyard of Fairclough Manor in a soft, golden glow as guests and staff milled quietly following the magistrate's departure. The weight of weeks' tension had lifted, replaced by relief and a cautious optimism. In the rose garden, Mr. Lionel Fairclough, himself, returning at last from London, stood beside Hercule Poirot, taking in the scene with a mixture of gratitude and solemnity. You have done me the greatest service, Monsieur Poirot. Lionel said, his voice steady but edged with emotion. Without your insight, I might never have understood the depth of fear and loyalty that motivated those I hold dear. Poirot inclined his head, his grey eyes reflecting the late sun. It has been a journey fraught with peril, mon ami, but also one that revealed the best of human impulses, compassion, courage, and ultimately, confession. In every heart lies both shadow and light. My task was merely to illuminate the shadows. Lionel turned, beckoning Lady Estelle and Miss Clara Everton to join them. Lady Estelle's lavender gown was spotless once more, yet her fine hands trembled as she offered a small bouquet of violets to Lionel, a gesture of contrition woven with the story's truest symbol. My nephew, she said quietly, her voice thick with feeling, I am sorry for the pain I caused. I feared losing your trust more than anything. I hope these violets may remind you that even in regret, there can be beauty. Lionel accepted the flowers gently. He pressed a hand to his aunt's arm. Your courage in confessing spared lives and revealed a greater plot. I ask only that you continue to show the same honesty going forward. Miss Everton stepped forward. Sir, if I may, she said, the Bluebell shop remains at your disposal. I have a sentiment that brighter days and blooms await us all. Lionel offered her a gracious smile. Then I shall not lose my florist to poison, but rather to promise. Clara, your steadiness saved us. He turned to Poirot, the hint of a wry smile touching his lips. And you, monsieur, what would you have me do with our solicitor, Mr. Wyndham? The magistrate's sentence is harsh. I wish to temper it. Poirot's moustache quivered in a discreet smile. Votre Excellence, justice must follow its course. But mercy is within your prerogative. A letter from you to the Home Secretary and a promise to provide Wyndham with suitable work upon release would demonstrate both authority and compassion. Lionel nodded thoughtfully. It shall be done. He looked at Poirot. You have my deepest thanks. The detective allowed himself a small bow. It is my great pleasure. And now, mon cher, I must journey on to my next case. The world contains many mysteries, and my little grey cells grow impatient when idle. Lionel extended his hand. Before you depart, please accept this, a token of our gratitude. He presented Poirot with a small silver vase, engraved with the Fairclough cresta, stylized violet encircling a laurel. May it remind you of your time here, and of the garden that witnessed truth's final bloom. Poirot's eyes brightened. He accepted the gift with both hands, reverently. I am honored, monsieur. I shall place it with Carrand, fill it with fresh violets each spring, that it may stand as a testament to the power of revelation and of mercy. As the sun dipped lower, Poirot turned toward the garden's winding path. He paused, looking once more at the small circle he had helped to heal. A niece forgiven, a friend's life spared, a florist commended, and a family reunited. With a graceful nod to each, he stepped onto the path, his polished shoes crunching. Lightly on the gravel, Lady Estelle called softly, Monsieur Poirot, thank you. He stopped, raised his hand in farewell, and turned a final time. Remember always, it is not only the sharp blade of evidence that cuts through deception, but the soft petals of empathy that bind us to truth. With that, he walked away, the silver vase gleaming in his coat pocket, and the garden's blooms whispering of secrets laid to rest. The manor's gates opened to admit him to the wider world, where fresh enigmas awaited and where the little grey cells would once again. Triumph thus ended the affair at the Bluebell flower shop and the Bluebell estate, an investigation woven from poison, petals, and the indomitable human spirit, resolved at last by the elegance of mind and the grace of the heart.